We're going to talk. Both of these talks are just about the perfect timing. So I'm going to do, it's kind of a flip flop. It's 50-50. What we did wrong. And there's a lot of this that I want you to think of the beekeeping, look at yourself in the mirror and give yourself a grade. Were you that A plus beekeeper that was in there all the time doing everything correctly, had your mite counts, things like that? Sometimes if you even have to give yourself a B, B minus, or a C, it could have been of things outside your realm, just like mine this year. I give myself a C. COVID came in, tax season got extended by 3 months, family issues, extended family issues, things happen, but we still, your problem or interior problems of a lot of different things, a lot of the things go wrong with our bees, and you really still need to understand what goes wrong with them, the post-mortem, or what's going to happen afterwards, how you're going to take care of those problems. So we'll start going through some of these. And you guys all know me. And remember the national award we won that was on page 2 under the fold? And somebody else got the first page. What we did wrong with Varroa. And you guys know I step on this soapbox every time. This is the #1 killer that's killing all the bees. It's the what's going wrong. And the easiest way to do it is up here on the lower left. Just take an alcohol wash. And you guys that are doing it faithfully and hearing back from me, and you're seeing 1s and 2s and 3s, and that is absolutely wonderful. So give yourself a round of applause, because that's what you need to do. The beekeepers, and there are beekeepers still in Defiance County and around, and if you go, and I ask, if you have time, and once we get over this COVID thing, I hope to God soon, come to the club when we go up to like Williams County, when we go up to the Maple Festival, and go to outside things when we go out to like the Hot Air Balloon Fest, and people come up and talk about, oh, I'm a beekeeper, and beekeepers love to talk to each other. And then you say to the next beekeeper, you know, what's your Varroa count? And they'll give you the strangest look, like they've never heard of Varroa. And well, I want to be all insecticide free, and I don't want to have this. Well, do you get your bees through wintertime? No, never had. I buy packages every year. And you'll know why some of these people are only a beekeeper for 1 or 2 years, because it's not sustainable. So make sure you do an alcohol wash, and all you're doing is you're making sure that you're checked, just like going to the doctor's office. You don't go in there and ask for a steroid shot and a Z-Pack and all this other stuff. All you're doing is you're getting the accurate count with alcohol. You're sacrificing 300 bees to save 60,000 bees. And remember, if your hive crashes, think of all the work that you've got into it at this point. You've got in class, you've got all the education, you've got the equipment, you have your time, all the time that you spent trying to go over and monitoring your bees. There's an investment. And roughly what OSBA and ODA calls, we have roughly $1,000 in every colony that you properly raise from January to December. And that's giving yourself roughly about $15 an hour. So the other way to do this, if in the beginning of season, all the way till this end, you're going to see the drones. So take the pick tool and you can shove it inside the drones, freeze them. Remember, we talked about taking the green drone comb, putting them inside, or if you have a big batch of drones in your one area, take the pick or the scratch tool. If you have the ADK kit, it came in there, or you can order them online, shove them through the drones and then pop them up. So they're like little popsicles on the end of a stick. You're just shoving it through their heads and you're yanking it up, flip it over, and then really look. And sometimes a magnifying glass is really good. The microscopes like Gail has really good. Look underneath these drones and you can see where the mature females are at. So those are the foundresses. Those are the ones going in and laying eggs. And you can look, if you really look good, you can see the ones that are immature. So the little blonde ones that are almost fluorescent, and they're about the same color as the pupae. So you can start looking. This is not scientific, that it's not going to give you accurate numbers, but if you have a half a frame of drones and you scratch them all open and tear them open and inspect like this, and you don't see any drones, you know you're still on the good path. If you see a chunk of drones here to the lower right, and you see tons and tons and tons. This picture was a gentleman who's in the Northwest Ohio Beekeepers Club with Dwight Wilson's the president down south. And he said, I have tons of drones. And I said, send me and Dwight a picture. This is the picture he sent. And he goes, do you think I have a problem? So you guys tell me, you think he has a problem? That hive crashed within about a week and a half. That's hundreds of Varroa. And this is a gentleman that was used to be, I want to be all chemical free and I don't want chemicals inside my colony. After this, and we showed him, and I kept these pictures. I got like 15 of these pictures. Then he started going with chemicals. And you don't always have to pick the hard stuff, but you guys know how I kind of read the Honeybee Health Coalition. And if you honestly, I know people don't like to raise their hand or ask questions because I outside of you guys, you know, I might look dumb. There's always somebody in the crowd that's going to ask that same question and they're too scared to ask it. So just ask it. So if you don't understand the chemicals, you don't understand the efficacy, you don't understand the PPE, please reach out. You got tons of support in this area. What do we do wrong about Varroa and diseases? Remember, it's not the Varroa that kills the bees. It's all the 20 plus that should be, and I apologize, I went to update that this morning. There's 28 diseases. So we got everything from acute bee paralysis virus, cashmere disease, Israeli acute paralysis. If you ever see a very high mite count, the Israeli acute paralysis, your bees will look like wasps. They have no hair. It's a complex and a virus that they actually start grooming themselves so much that you'll see these if you get inside of a hive that's like that, as an inspector, I've seen this way too much. The mite count is completely off the chart. And all of a sudden you'll see all these little bees running around and you'll go, oh, that's a wasp. And why are your bees feeding? Why are my bees, your honeybees, feeding this wasp? If you look at the body and the structure, it's a honeybee. But they've got this virus and it's kind of like K-wing, deformed wing virus, and the list goes on and on from there. So remember, deformed wing virus. Remember last month I showed you the lady in, I think she was south of Defiance, that said, I have a lot of these bees like this, and they're not mine, but I have like hundreds of these bees crawling around in my garden with no wings. And I got into a Facebook battle back and forth trying to educate, which went on deaf ears. So if your viruses are that high, then you need to start looking at the hard chemicals. Sac brood problems, is that nice, white, and creamy? Absolutely not. So we know we have some kind of disease, and I'm not asking you guys to understand every disease. And we'll talk about the California book coming up, Canadian book. And it gives all the viruses, and it's updated every about 2.5 years. If you look at the release dates, and they bring that up to speed all the time. This is the cashmere disease. So or Israeli disease. You'll see these bees, they look like bees, but there's no hairs on them. So that's the problem. Any of these signs like this is that Varroa is up off the chart, at least 50 to 300 bees. So that means 50 mites for every 300 bees. And they're just vectoring the disease back and forth. Because
Hey,
remember,
Jamie?
yes, sir.
So as an example, in July, I had with the appropriate alcohol wash, with the appropriate brood frames, I had no mites. In August, I had no mites in either colony. In September, I had what I thought looked to be 2 in one colony and 3 in another. My question is so when I go into October, let's say there's, let's make it easy on me. Let's say there's 4 or 5 in there. In November, let's just say it's still low, 3 to 5. In November, which I think we've been told is when you might want to hit them with oxalic acid.
Yes, sir.
If I had 3 to 5, would I still hit them with oxalic acid?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, because remember, your queens are going into the shutdown mode. So they're going to go all the way down to that December December, January, even February sometime, if it's not too cold, they're going to start ramping back up if they stored enough pollen. So when you're doing your full hive inspection now, if they have in that excess pollen, so right now there's 4 different breeds of goldenrod that are pouring in right now. All the extra fields, I mean, if there's anything else in bloom, they're going to pull this in and they're going to start packing it up. And the queen, even though they have pollen, they're going to keep in that shutdown mode. They know they have to get through the winter time. So if your mite count right now is at, let's just say 2, by the numbers, because the drones are being all kicked out. And please do not panic if you start seeing tons of white pupae coming out the front. You don't have a chalk brood disease, because remember, chalk brood is a springtime wet dampness disease. You don't have anything else going on. If you have, depending on your microenvironment, if you have a dearth going on, so like 2 weeks ago, maybe 2.5 weeks ago, when everything was hot and dry and there was the clay in our area was cracking up the ground, everything was going into a dearth. And when I say the dearth, the nectar's up, falling up, what happens is the bees start to eat the heads off the drones and the brood because of the vitagelin in the head. And also at that same time, they're eating the eggs and the larvae for protein, and they're taking the rest of the body that's already formed. There's nothing viable for it. They carry it out the front entrance. So in that dearth is the time when we talked about last month. Take that little chunk of pollen and put it on the top. Not a pollen patty, but maybe a little golf ball size, put 2 on. In 2 to 3 days, if that's gone, put on another 2, put on another 2. They will eat it because there's nothing else coming in. If you put it on top, and let's just say all of a sudden goldenrod kicked in, they're not going to eat that pollen patty because the real stuff's coming in the front door. They only eat our junk, and I say junk because it's all man-made stuff, but they're going to only eat our stuff when nothing else is coming in. So if you need to pack on the pollen, or excuse me, you need to pack on the nectar, if your colonies are light, and we'll talk about this here in a little bit, if your colonies are light, in another 2 to 3 weeks, it'd be the time to start putting on 2-to-1 sugar water. So depending on how you want to play it, you can put in a scoop, take a 5-gallon bucket. For every whatever container size you have, for every 2 scoops of sugar you put in, put a scoop of water. It's a lot harder to mix up. It's better to put it on a stove or some kind of heat, on a low heat, get it up to a little bit of a simmer, and as you're adding the sugar, then it hits the water, and it's that frosty color of sugar. As you mix it up, it'll turn clear. As soon as it turns clear, pour in more sugar. And you can do it reverse, and it's a lot easier to do that, but with hot water. Don't get it to a raging boil or scorch it, because then if you scorch it, then you're caramelizing it and you'll kill your bees. So there's some things that coming up, but by the numbers, John, if you have 2 now, you're going to have 4 next month. By the time December hits, you're going to have that 4 or 2 that turned into 4, you're going to have 8. By the time you hit January, you're going to have 16, and your bees will die in February, March. So what we're doing is trying to get our numbers as low as we can right now. Also, remember, your girls, they love to work. Honeybees are the best workers in the world. They're also opportunists. So if you have a dead out nearby, get it, or even in your own apiary, make sure you get it out as soon as possible and find out why it died. That if your bees are robbing other colonies, and this is why I talk about if you have neighbors nearby that don't take care of their bees, or even let's just say a feral colony, your mite counts could be at 1 and 2. You've done everything correctly. For let's say from April, May, June, July, you've checked every month. You've been faithful about it. All of a sudden you go into a mite count, and all of a sudden you got 18. And and I have seen that. When we had Commercial Beekeeper F in Defiance County, there was people in the club that had 1s and 2s and 3s. They could stay consistent all year. As Commercial Beekeeper F let 800 colonies in Defiance County crank up to 100 and 200 mites per 300, our bees that were healthy were tearing up theirs and bringing all the mites back. Tony Egley, if you want to talk to anybody, talk to Tony Egley. Tony Egley she kept everything under control her first year being a beginner. And all of a sudden, that first year, she had Mr. Beekeeper Commercial F left all his bees go. He put in, when I talked to him, he put in a microfiber rag, which is for hive beetle, not for white or not for Varroa, and her spiked up to over 18. So she had to treat immediately and then treat again and then come out, and she lost about half of her colonies. So just know that even if you've done everything correctly, remember your bees are out foraging that 2.5 miles. They can go up to the 5, and whatever's in that area, you're talking thousands of acres. So feral colonies, other beekeepers in your area, put them on the right path too. And then when it's 38 degrees and above between Thanksgiving and Christmas is the time to hit them with the vapor, because they're brood less. If they have no brood, remember, none of the chemicals that we give them, either the Sledgehammer, the Apivar, Apistan, and the hard chemicals, Mitaway, Quick Strips, Formic Pro, HopGuard, nothing gets underneath the cappings. And that's where the Varroa are multiplying, underneath the pupated capped cells. So if it's brood less and the queen has shut down and you hit them with oxalic, that's when the bees are traveling it around. And I'm never going to say 100%, but you might get a 99% kill of the Varroa. It is organic, but it's still an acid. And then you can get your bees through that January, February, March. And then when you get into that March, April, as soon as you can go into your colony, let's say April, 50 degrees and above, because you don't want to chill the brood. She's building up. Then you can go in there and hit them with either Apivar. You can turn on, do a brood break when they build up. So our bees get up, they get strong. What's the first thing to do naturally in the spring to run, break that brood cycle? Do an artificial swarm. Take the old queen with a frame of brood and make a split. Let the colony think that she already split. And then the colony, the healthy colony that you have left over, is going to make a new queen. All the bees are going to merge. All the Varroa crashes because there's nothing else left. It's early in the season. You made a split. You could sell that split off for 180 plus. I think nukes are going to go up to about 200 next year. So nukes turn around, you can make some money back. They have a new queen. You have a good viable colony, and then you just made money on top of it. So a lot of different ways to play that.
On sugar water, a couple weeks ago in the dearth, I did 1-to-1, and a gallon in each. I have a looks like a hive with the floating. Okay, and so I had a gallon,
a top feeder.
Yeah, and it was without the Mm-hmm. So and actually it works very well. I really like because the bees sit on it like a raft and suck stuff. It's kind of interesting. At any rate, that was 1-to-1. It was gone. I checked it about 6 days later. It was bone dry. So I put another 1-to-1 on this last week. I'm guessing that was like 5 days ago. It's going to be bone dry. And I don't know if I read or heard someplace that it might be okay to do 2-to-1. So I made 2-to-1 yesterday. Are you thinking that that's not a good time to put on, or should I try the 2-to-1?
Okay. Don't, and I'm going to say this for both sides. Don't just feed to feed. Okay. If they're going to take it, what happens is at this time, it's still kind of warm out and we're getting late swarm season, because what happens if you feed too much, you're going to feed, and what they're doing where that normal area, let's remember that your frame, they're backfilling. If they have excess area to store it, that's fine. But if you keep feeding too much, they're going to backfill that area that she's normally laying brood, and that you're going to push them into a thing just like springtime when the nectar flow kicks in. What happens? They start to backfill the brood area, and it pushes the colony into swarm mode.
Yeah.
So make sure when you're feeding that you're feeding for the right purpose, that after you feed is a good time to open up that box and make sure that the brood area where she's laying in that honey dome or lower is open. Make sure it's not that wet that looks like water's inside her brood area,
Mm-hmm.
because you can actually overfill and keep feeding them. You know, and I learned the lesson too. You know, Dwight Wilson, he was a great mentor by letting me run on my own a little bit and letting me make mistakes, not mistakes that I killed them, but make enough mistakes that I go, oh yeah, why did my bees swarm, Dwight? Well, look inside. Well, I had filled them so much that I put on 1 gallon pickle jars. I just kept throwing them on. They're taking it, Dwight. All of a sudden my bees all swarmed. And he goes, what'd you learn from it? I don't know. He says, look at the brood area. They had backfilled everything all the way down. Okay. If the colony, as long as that brood area is open and they're filling up the top section. So say you had some drone comb in the top, maybe that first, second box, and there's still area that's open, but the brood area is open, you're fine.
Yeah. Okay.
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 So always inspect. I mean, just don't throw feed on for feed, but
Yeah.
make sure you're leaving that area. And it's not real bad once we start getting a little bit, let's say, if the weather keeps gradually going down, maybe feed that for another week or two.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as it starts to fill, you start to see that top, because they're going to fill all the top boxes first. As it comes down, if you start to see it just starting to get into that brood, that honey dome, then cut them off. Because what they're doing is they're actually pushing that queen down to the lower box, which is a good thing, because you want her to stay down in that lower box and get everything filled up as much as you can. But it's like everything. A good beekeeper keeps their bees at a certain point. You want to keep them to the edge that they're overly populated, being healthy and strong. They're keeping away the mites. They're keeping away the wax moth. They're maximizing the production of honey, but they're on that edge of swarming. So it's like walking down the highway with semis on each side going at 90 miles an hour. One side is going to set you all the way back. The other side is going to set you all the way forward, and they're going to swarm. And you got to walk that line in between. And the only beekeepers I know that do that are the beekeeper, and it's not me. I'll be honest. It's the beekeepers that are in their colonies that 1 to 2 weeks all the time, inspecting, making records, and building up experience. I know what the line is, but even I at times don't even have the time to be in there like I should. The only person I know that does it is Dwight Wilson. And I'm not trying to push up Dwight, but if you guys ever have time to meet Dwight, internship, you can go out to his house anytime you want. And he is a beekeeper that pushes his bees right to that maximum flow all the time. And is he flawless? No. I mean, there's still swarms in his trees that they get ahead of him sometimes, but you're pushing that envelope and you're thinking outside the box. You're thinking 3 months ahead for your bees all the time, because your brood takes 21 days to emerge. You need to be thinking that 3 weeks ahead, like I've told you guys in the very beginning. Those little nukes, they're going to go through this slingshot all the time. They're going to have tons and tons of brood. And what's going to happen? They're going to explode. So you got to have room for them. Or is all the brood gone and you got tons and tons of eggs that you need to feed with tons of pollen? So now we have the slingshot on the other side. Things are ramping down. Varroa is coming up. So there's a lot of the different things to think about. And I wish you could write a book and say, this is the ABCs of beekeeping, and this will get you through every one time. But it's just not. Every hive's different, and you guys have, through talking to you each month, I pray that we could have had tons of hands-on, but you guys seen in your own apiaries. I think Jen, more than anybody, has seen that. Katie was the same way. When you see the bees, you'll have one colony that acts she's flawless, and another colony that requeens herself or does this and does that. That's just beekeeping. And if you multiply that and you have 25 hives, you see it way much more. With Andrew Carlin, I know he even accepts people to go around with him. I mean, he's not doing it this year because of COVID, but and if you want to go on inspections with me, I'll take you on inspections. But I always say, if you go on inspections with me, nitro gloves, because you'll see some of the worst beekeepers in the world. And then we'll go to other yards and you'll see the best beekeepers of the world.
I would give the good and the bad here. I would give myself an A as it relates to the criteria of being in my bees at least once a week is what I usually do. And then I check the hives in the morning and the afternoon just to see activity. I do not break them open. As it relates to, so I would give myself an A for that based on what I'm hearing. I'm retired, so I have that time.
Yep.
And that's a good thing. but I would give myself closer to a D as it relates to what the hell am I looking at? So I get in the hive. That's great. And I've read a lot and I've gone through the internship, but it's like you, what I need is that more the hands-on, someone going, well, no, look what's happening here. Well, what's happening there? I don't see it because I don't
John,
know. You know, does that make sense?
Honestly, I understand every sentence into that. I mean, if it wouldn't have been, for those of you that know what 4 County is, 4 County is, you can take your junior and senior year and go out to 4 County, and it's hands-on learning. I will promise you that with this in my life, and I believe in this 100%. If it wouldn't have been for 4 County, I would still be in high school. I am not a person to sit and read books and recite things. I was an awful student in school up to my junior year. When I went to 4 County, I went from C's and D's and barely getting through school to got up to 4 County, hands-on. I graduated with honors. So beekeeping is one of those things that, you know, I love this side of the PowerPoint because I can show you overall what's going on, but without the hands-on of seeing a colony with tons of eggs and thinking, okay, what do I need to do? All right, I need to feed. I need to make sure there's tons of pollen. And all of a sudden the next frame has this, this, and this. And how do I see that? That's where at the apiary, I mean, I would take colonies and take the queen out. We go through them all the time. You know, I go out and really, I screw up 20, 30 hives, and it doesn't bother me because I got tons of them at home. But it gives everybody, there's always teams of 2. I always make you guys rotate. I always made people rotate up without the hands-on part. So right now, I feel like I'm in handcuffs behind my back. Mm-hmm. And when the county commissioners came back to me, and I think I know the person who kind of ratted me out to them, I mean, not to be mean about it, but said, you know, Jamie's having classes out there. And then all of a sudden, oh, I can't go out there now, and we can't do this and can't do that. I'm hoping it kind of gets over with, that we can turn on, at least do something. And like I've told you guys before, any of you that want to take the class next year and we can get our hands untied, or we can change things up. And talking to the other club members, I think we have a couple ways of doing that. Because Gail has offered that we go up to the apiary with her, and maybe a small group wants to go up towards Archibald area that's closer to that. John and Bev Gray have offered to maybe set some nukes up around their pond where we won't have to count on the apiary for the county, because if it's still tied in with COVID, because we got wintertime coming up, that we could actually go out there and then maybe do some stuff outside of that. Dwight Wilson offered up his place, except he does not want to be there because his wife has cancer. So she's going through the same thing my mom's going through. So he said he wouldn't be there, but he would allow me access to take 3 or 4 of you at a time and go out and really dig through some monster 7 and 8 box tall colonies and go out. He's also got an extracting room where I can show you hands-on how to extract, how to put it through the spinner, and how to do things. So we're thinking outside the box for next year. And you guys, I promise you can take the class with me for another 10 years as long as I'm alive.
Can I give you a quick example? You know, since I certainly don't, and I did not mean to even intimate that that I'm holding you responsible for not having hands-on. That is not.
No. I take no offense to that.
Yeah, that's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that I believe to be probably the most helpful thing. And here would be an example. For example, right now, and I do keep, every time I get out of the hive, I can show you, I have a record of each box that I looked at and what's going on. So in the one colony, I have colony 1. I have a box that's at the top that's 85, 90% capped honey. Okay. Well, why don't you extract it? Because I want to make sure I have some stuff for winter, right? So I'm just go on. So the second box is probably 50 to 60% nectar capped honey. The next box is one that was extracted, and virtually all it is, at least as of 3-4 days ago, and this is after 2 weeks, it's just really, they just cleaned out. They just cleaned it all up, and it's just pretty much, except for one frame, about 30% has some nectar. The other 7 frames have nothing. It's just all drawn comb.
Yep.
Then I have another deep that I have put on there to draw comb. This was about 6 weeks ago, to draw comb and actually use black instead of yellow this time so I could see the eggs better. And then the brood nest, which is just popping. She's really a good queen. So as an example, I know that sometime in the next few weeks, but I don't know. I don't know jack squat.
All right.
But I know that in the next few weeks, I'm going to need to somehow compress that to probably maybe a deep and 2 mediums, of which would be what, maybe like the deep with the brood and the 2 honey ones? Or does that make sense? I'm not sure what to do.
Yeah. Well, take that, do me a favor and set that, kind of draw it out, and we'll talk about that at the end.
Okay.
So we stay on time for this. And if you guys want to, seriously, draw it out. And then what I can do on this program, you can share your screen with me, so you can draw it out, or if you have a little program that you can turn on, draw it out on the screen. And then we'll talk about that, or what we'll do, I'll put the whiteboard up and you guys can actually draw on it, and we have where the screen's at, it's like a chalkboard, and we can all interact with it. So you can draw it out, and if we have time at the end, we'll go ahead and do that.
Sure.
Yeah, and I'll walk you through it, John.
Thanks.
All right, let's get back on track with this. The mite counts, and you guys will see this in every slide that I talk about. Making sure your mite count. If you don't have to have the easy check, but if you want something a little bit easier, just go ahead and take the $20. If not, if you have mason jars or you have canning stuff, you can use the number 8 screen. If you need a little section of screen, I have probably a 50-foot roll of it. So make sure you take that, write down all your stuff. And even though, and I'm going to jump on something that John said, even though you might not know what's going on, make all your notes. Because if you have to go to an inspector or to a club member or somebody senior or a mentor, those notes are going to save you hours and hours and hours of confusion. And again, with the Honeybee Health Coalition. This is my mistake in 2018. Dwight Wilson has frames of brood, or excuse me, frames of pollen, that if it's old pollen in a full colony in the springtime, when they build up so much, that he throws them away. I started taking them and put them in boxes in my garage, and I put moth crystals in between every box. But the moth crystals do what? They evaporate. So what happened is this whole stack of yellow boxes, I think there was 4 deeps on this one, 5 deeps in the other. So what's this gigantic mess? Wax moth. And there was not a stitch. And if you look at the drywall in the back, where they found the little slot to come in and out of, they actually pupated, and they ate into my drywall in my garage and pupated. I probably had maybe 4 or 5 billion wax moths that had chewed up all the honey, or all the pollen, laid all the eggs, all pupated out. And now you can see that I bought at Walmart I bought 4 little tiny bug zappers that hang in my garage. So that's a mistake that you make, because people turn around and store equipment. Always remember, the moth crystals, yes, they're good, but they eventually evaporate. And what I used to do with those frames of pollen is I take a frame out. When I do a split with a young queen that just started laying, you take that frame of pollen, you put it in there, and they explode, because they got tons and tons of bee bread, tons and tons. It's like taking a pudgy kid to a buffet of ice cream and cookies and all the junk he wants to eat. That's the bees. And everybody asks me, how do you get your bees to explode like that? By doing this trick. But this trick backfired on me, because I forgot about the crystals. I got kind of lazy on the timing. I didn't check the crystals, and there is probably 120, 100 some odd frames that went to junk. So just know, there's a beekeeper in our club, a husband and wife, that just lost 3 colonies to wax moth. So just make sure you're diligent. And remember, we have the greater and the lesser wax moth in our area. Also know that they do go dormant. If you have tons of these in your operation, or you put, Sonny Ward put 5 boxes of undrawn comb or drawn comb, but there was nothing in it. He kind of waxed or spun them out. He put it in his 8x8 little yard barn, so it's not secure. Remember, we always talk about having things that are secure. He put in moth crystals. They evaporated. He lost probably 75 boxes of drawn comb. So remember, they're going to go dormant for 1 to 5 months, and that female is going to lay 1,000 to 2,000 eggs in her lifetime, which is only about 2.5 months, and then they'll come out. So as eggs, all you're going to see is that little frass. If you see it in a frame that's operating, so you to run and go out, and this is the perfect time of year that they will get ahead. Remember, our strong colonies will defend against these wax moths, but you cannot let your colony have too much room. They have to have enough bees. So remember, at nights now, our nights are getting to that 45 and 50. So remember, that colony is starting to cluster. They're not protecting the front door. They're not protecting the upper entrance unless there's a bunch of bees. If you go inside your colony, and remember when I talk about gaps of bees, 10 frame box, 11 gaps. I want almost every gap full. If you have excess gear on there that should not be on there, and you think they're going to fill it up later, or the colony's not strong enough, then take 2 colonies and combine them together, or shrink the thing down. If you turn to have a frame of pollen, which right now the goldenrod's pouring in, please do not think, and if you guys have been in your colonies, all of a sudden you're getting this funky smell. I smell it as it reminds me of being in football in the locker room. That stinky, sweaty, wet smell. That's what it reminds me of. Mark Newman, he thinks it smells like buttered popcorn, which, dear God, I don't know why. But he smells as buttered popcorn. And a lot of the people, inexperienced people, not saying just you, everybody, they think they have American foul brood, because all of a sudden they open up the top of their colony and it has this funky smell. That is the smell of goldenrod coming in. If your bees cannot watch it, if you pick up a frame of pollen and see this little zigzags back and forth, that's a wax moth larvae that here's maybe the eggs, and they're starting to do this zigzag and eat each frame or each cell going up. If there's brood beside it, you'll see lines where the bees are uncapping the line in the brood. They'll take the pupae or the larvae out, and they're trying to get down to get the wax moth. So if you see that,
this, what do you take the frame out then, or what do you do when you see?
I take the zigzag. Okay? If you see that frame, take the entire frame. If it has brood or whatever on it, it doesn't matter. If there's a little section of it, you can take your hive tool, scratch it out. If you start to see, if you see this just like this is going up the entire frame, take those frames, go put them in a Ziploc freezer or Ziploc bag, or in your bee operation or in your 5-gallon bucket that you're taking to your apiary, keep some kitchen bags and little white kitchen bags, and take those 2 or 3 frames. Maybe there's only one. If you're diligent and you're checking it all the time and you only find one frame like that, put it in that, go stick it in the freezer for 48 hours. Bring it back, put it back in, then take your hive tool and just carve this area out. If you have plastic foundation, it's easier to carve. If you have real wax foundation, you can kind of scrape it, but don't push real hard, because with having new comb, you can actually scrape it a little bit too hard and blow that whole frame out. So when you're scratching it, just scratch it down. If you have plastic, it's much easier. You can scratch it right down to the foundation, and then the bees will rebuild it. So freeze that frame for 48 hours. If they've already consumed, so in this next slide, they've already consumed every bit of wax, and that's what you'll see. That frame was complete. It was all drawn out comb. And now that's all you see. All you see is the spider webbing and the frass, which is the little pieces of BBs of crap that have taken all over. What happens in this other slide off to the right, there's all those little pupae, and they've eaten into the wood. So it's like taking a little router bit and carving it into the wood each time, because they'll chew the wood, they'll pupate it up and spin their cocoon. That's thousands and thousands of wax moth. If you seem so necessary to do it, you can take that box, put it in an aquarium, pop each one of them larvae out, take it to people that go fishing. That's what when you go and you fish for bass or carp or crappie, you can buy wax worms and you can sell them, I think, for 3 cents a piece. So depending on what you want to do, but when you start seeing this, you need to turn around and get everything crunched down. You can reuse that box because all they've done is went into that wood and just carved it out like a 1/16 of an inch. You can reuse it if you need to. Same way with the frame. If you have the time and you only have a few hives, you could take and scratch all this spider webbing out, take a wire brush, clean everything off, put it back in your circulation. Or you could take the plastic frame, pop it out of the wood, scrape the wood down, and pop a new foundation in it. That's the nice thing about plastic. The other side about plastic is your bees don't want to jump on it all the time. The other thing you'll see is what's going wrong here. You got the hive beetle that are taking over, and they'll actually crawl right out, and they're crawling in between the cells looking for any amount of pollen and honey. So remember our hive beetle. She's going to deposit the same amount of eggs in her lifetime, which is about a month and a half. They'll pupate in the ground 4 to 6 weeks. So if you're getting overrun by hive beetle, then you can turn on and do the ground soak, which is a pyrethroid. And you spray it at night. It's about 1.5 ounces per 1 gallon of hot water. You mix it up, spray it at night. It is highly toxic to your bees. If there's anything in bloom in your apiary, do not spray this stuff around the apiary. So what I do, if I'm going to use it, and I have used it, and I started using it again this year because I'm starting to see not tons of hive beetle, but there's certain colonies that there's some of them in them and some of them not. Mow the grass down to the ground, maybe that 1.5 inch to 2 inch, and then at night go out with a red flashlight or a red coon hunter's light and then spray underneath the ground. Because what happens if these girls turn around and get in your colony and they pupate out, the larvae get into the ground and they'll come back out and they're going to turn around and come right back up them colonies and overrun. That is a colony that was just north of me about 4.5 miles. There were so many hive beetle that have consumed. These are all the slimy larvae. And they smell like, to me, it smells like Schlitz beer. Back in the day when the boys used to turn on and drink all the cheap beer. The thing that'll happen is these larvae just don't go after the pollen, they also go after the honey. As they crawl around, their frass or crap will ferment the honey. If you open up a colony, you'll see all these little micro bubbles of all this honey that's fermenting out. The precaution here is if you see hive beetle beginning of the year or right now, that mid-season right before fall, put in your beetle traps, your beetle jails, microfiber, your cassettes. And when I say cassettes, they're little tiny 4x4 cassettes that you can buy Man Lake, Brushy Mountain. If you have people that have the political signs, I'll show you a trick you can do with political signs. And you put in boric acid along with Crisco on the outside, and you put them on your bottom board. And what they do, the hive beetle that come in, they'll crawl through, they'll eat through the Crisco, go in and eat the boric acid and die. And all you got to do is pull that little thing out. If you see a frame of this, and people ask me all the time, can I take that frame out then, freeze it, and leave it out for the bees to rob? Absolutely not. Because what's going to happen as they're crawling around and this honey's fermenting, you're going to see micro bubbles in it. So think of it as fermented beer. If it's fermented beer and I drink it, what happens to my stomach? I'm going to turn on it. I'm going to start feeling sick. Your bees come in, they consume this fermented beer, this fermented honey. They go back to your healthy colonies and redigest it, and they're not cleaning it up. So it's like having throw up into the next cell. They'll ferment this. Your other colonies will have fermentation where the frame the honey underneath will ferment and it'll pop out of the cappings. And then you pick up a frame of honey and you'll see all these little streaks of water. And if you look at it close, you'll see all these little micro bubbles where the honey is fermenting and it's blowing out. If you take a container of honey, any container, glass container, plastic container of honey, and you pour about half the water in there so you have a high moisture content, and seal it up tight. Put it on a shelf or put it outside if it's glass, because it'll actually explode. It'll build up so much pressure. And what's happening in the frames is that honey's fermenting and blowing up. And so if you ever have a frame like that, throw it in the fire or get rid of it. Don't keep it around. Oh, bye. So what did we do wrong here? And I pray that none of you ever have to see this. As a beginner with, and I'm going to say this again, new gear. Even if you see it on Marketplace at a garage sale and someone goes, yeah, my uncle had these, used to do bee-box stuff, and I got this whole pile of bee gear for $20. And you're going to go, wow, that's a cheap deal. You know, $20 is one hive body, and I'm going to buy it. Why did the uncle get out of beekeeping? You know, was it American foul brood back in the day? American foul brood spore, either on a frame, on a box, or anything like that, can survive supposedly through ODA, and I've seen it through OSB the USDA. Microscopic spores of American foul brood can live up to 10,000 years. That's more than my lifetime. That's more. So buy new gear. When you're transferring tools, the best thing to do is you have a hive tool per apiary. Use nitrile gloves. If you have leather gloves, then have a leather glove. I used to have, back in the day, I had leather gloves and I kept them in a sealed container with a hive tool, and that was for the winery up in Bryan. And then I had another set of leather gloves and a hive tool for the one in my backyard. And then I had another one for other places. If you have leather gloves and you don't mind a little bit of extra cost, you can take the nitrile surgical gloves and put it over the top of your leather gloves. So that way you have the protection of leather, but you're keeping the disease down. If you have multiple areas that you're inspecting, or multiple apiaries, that you can just peel the rubber gloves off, put them in a garbage bag. I always have a garbage bag in the back of the Envoy. And then when you go to the new apiary, slide them on. Once you become an experienced beekeeper, and this could be 2 years, it could be 4 years, when you feel safe, then switch to nitrile gloves. So you're not using the leathers anymore. You're only using nitrile gloves. It does two things. Number one, it makes you a better beekeeper. And if not, you're going to get stung a lot. So when you use just nitrile gloves, the nice thing is the dexterity of your fingers. You can handle queens. You can pick up queens much easier because you feel the pressure between your fingertips. It makes you go slower when you're flipping frames and doing things. When you're picking up frames, it makes you go slower, because if not, if you get too speedy, what happens? They will sting you right through the nitrile gloves. So it makes you slow down. It makes it, to me, Kevin Adkins, Kevin Adkins, this is the commercial beekeeper. He made the comment to me when he got me kind of pushed on nitrile gloves that it made him a better beekeeper because it slowed him down to enough to take the time to pull the frames up and do things. The nice thing about the nitriles, if you ever have a brood disease that you found on your own, or maybe you didn't, and then all of a sudden, what's the one thing that we stick in every colony is that hive tool. You stick it in your back pocket. You had it in your hands. You have, let's say, European foul brood. I go to another apiary with leather gloves that have EFB on it. The spores get into my next colony. Now my bees are feeding bees, and now all of a sudden my colonies are all crashing. So just remember that side of it. As new beekeepers with new gear, you might not see EFB, AFB, chalk brood, or any of these diseases for probably 3 to 4 years. The reason I'm not going to say 100% is if you have other beekeepers in your area that are not taking care of their colonies, this might something you might pop up in 1 year. I can't think of her name. There's two girls that come from Swanton area that come down to our club. Becky and somebody else. I can't think of her name right now. But
Jerry
Becky,
or Trinka?
yeah, thank you. So Becky, her first year of beekeeping, got European foul brood. But it came from other beekeepers in her area that had EFB. So you're not absolute guaranteed you're not going to get it, but there's a less of a chance. If you're being a good beekeeper, everybody around you is being a better beekeeper. Your brood diseases, of all else, don't panic. Don't go into, oh my God, I'm going to lose my hive. If you're in them every week to 2 weeks, the reason you're in it is because you're looking at the brood. Remember, you want to look at the nice white creamy brood. You want to have brood that is not twisted. You want to look at, is it wet brood or dry brood? So remember, wet brood, that means there's tons of resources coming in. Every larvae has an Olympic-sized pool of royal jelly to swim in. Dry brood is that maybe we're going into a dearth, or there's a microenvironment in your area, there's a lack of something going on. That means that little larvae has a little tiny, think about taking a saucer and putting your feet in that. And that's your little pool. And there's barely enough. That means there's not going to be healthy brood. That means the nurse bees are not regurgitating royal jelly because the vitagelin in their head's not being fed. So there's something that's going backwards. And that's the time when you see dry brood to feed 1-to-1 and start putting in pollen patties. The best side, if you don't know, if you cannot 100% say, I know it, talk to the club officers. Dwight Wilson, Alan, Roger, myself, the county inspectors. So most of you in this area are in one of ours, either Tim's, myself, Jason. I forgot to put Mike. Mike's over in Fulton and Henry County. And then if all else, talk to the state inspector, Barb Bletcher. And I promise you, I don't always know the answers, but I can turn around and take pictures of it. If you text or you take pictures, take the frame out, walk away from your colony, take 4 or 5 pictures of it, put the sun over your left or right shoulder so the sun's shining into it so we get a good picture of it. Take 4 or 5 random pictures of the same spot and send them. And then between myself, Tim does the same thing. I'm not sure about Jason. I usually put it on not just my phone because it's so small. I take and send it to one of my computers, blow it up real big, and then look inside the cells, and I can tell you about what's going on. If it is something that's iffy, is it European foul brood or American foul brood? I don't just judge that of what I see. I will come take a sample, either with Q-tips or take a knife and cut a brood section out and send it to the state. And either I send it to Barb Bletcher. If she doesn't have time for it for an immediate response, then I send it to Beltsville in Maryland. So our brood right here, what do we have up on the upper left? Wet brood, that nice wet and creamy. She's got tons of royal jelly. Off to the right, I want to see this. If you put the sun over your shoulder and look down inside and I see this entire frame, up in the corner, we see eggs, young larvae, the little tiny C's that have just emerged, old larvae, those big fat C's, and we see cap broods. So you see the whole gambit of things that are going on at just that one frame. And this is probably a nuke because they don't have it spread out. So there's not a big brood area. Sometimes when you guys open up your frames, you'll see a half a frame of just eggs. That means that full production is kicking in. You could see a full frame of all cap brood. That means they're really kicking in. And that's when things really switch and change up. But always that nice white and creamy. Would you say this frame is something you want to put back in rotation? Absolutely not. That's a dead out. It was a dead out. It still got some honey in the corners, but as the dead out died, the bees give off, it's like an oil and it's just nasty. If you have a dead out, instantly take it and do a post-mortem check. Take a half a cup of bees off the bottom board, do an alcohol wash and see if the mite count maybe killed it. Or all the bees heads in with their butt sticking out from starvation. And get it out of rotation, because if you let the bees all conglomerate around, that moisture kicks up with that oil glands. This is what you'll see in that fermented. It's like a white and gray mold. don't put that frame back in. Don't follow the YouTube stuff that dip it in bleach water, hit it with a power washer, and then put it back in rotation. And there's some guys down south that do it, and I hear it every time. Everybody's like, I want to save that frame. Is that, to me, is that worth $2 to put back in your operation that your bees are how are they going to clean it? With their mouths. And they're going to spread this all over to the other colonies. So you're just killing a colony by saving $2. And you guys remember when I said beekeeping wasn't cheap in the beginning? Is it worth wiping your colonies out for $2? And if you look at the spore in the top, there's some chalk brood that's starting because it's been wet and cold and it's getting nasty. So rotate those frames out. You guys don't have to worry about it because you're not going to see something like that into that springtime coming out. Ventilation, probably the biggest thing in the wintertime. Remember, even though it's wintertime and you guys are thinking, yeah, okay, the bees are in bed and I'm done. You're not. Go out and pop the hood. And remember, when I say peek underneath the hood, the telescoping cover, pop it, look at it. Right here, we see a little bit of frost around the outside edge, a little bit of moisture, and that's not a problem. You'll see some moisture up here. The bees are hanging off the top, and you can see the shininess, how it's a little bit wet. That's not a problem because the bees do need that little bit of moisture because they're eating that cold, thick, viscous honey. And they need moisture to take that down. So if you think of a concentrate, you're not going to take a concentrate orange juice and start drinking it. The bees need to liquefy that down into more like a Gatorade or a thinned out orange juice to be able to do that. If you ever open this top and see water like it's raining, or you see the corners, because you can't keep your colony completely square on a hive stand because the hive stand might tilt, the ground might be unlevel. So you'll see this pooling of water. If you open this up and there's a gigantic pool or Olympic-sized pool off to one side, you have a moisture problem. So just know what the difference is. Along with ventilation, there's a lot of the ways to take care of it. Drill a 5/8 hole in your upper box. So you paint them, drill a 5/8 hole, put your drill down low so you're angling the hole upwards a little bit. Perfect way to ventilate. Either the shims, I think Adam's going to build some more this year, so I'll check with him. But it's just taking a shim board from Menards or Lowell's. I think it's $1. I seen them the other day, $1.49 per 8-foot stick. Your inner covers you can use. There's nothing wrong with it. But some inner covers do not have the slot on the outside. So if yours does not have a slot, make sure before wintertime, either you carve one in, use a router, or find somebody that does woodworking that can cut a slot for you. The easiest way to do it, I don't do it this way. Dwight Wilson, Dwayne Hathaway, I know a lot of beekeepers that do. I put the nail off to the side just to represent what the tilt is. But what you're going to do is find the front entrance on the front. You're going to put a 16-penny nail to the left and one to the right. And you're propping it up under the under the inner cover to give it that 1/16 inch gap to get the excess moisture out, but the bees can't get in and the bees can't get out, or nothing else can get in. So it's another way to ventilate. And in this last one, that's a pillow top. So that's the box in the top that has the number 8 wire that you can put wood chips in, either cedar or pine or newspapers, and you can put feed up top. The nice thing is, if your colony has all the honey ready to go, you don't have to put in the extra feed. So you don't have to put in the winter patties, and you don't have to have the expense of doing all the other stuff. When we put in, like the shim, let's just say we put in a top box or a shim, an 1.5 or 1 3/4 shim, the reason we do that, we're going to put in a winter patty. You can put in some sugar blocks. You can put some things in that to help the bees. If they run out of honey, you can feed them a little bit of junk food. So if they start coming up and all of a sudden you pop at the top in, let's say late January, February, and you pop the top of this and the entire colony sitting there looking at you, you know there's something wrong. They've ran out of all their feed. They're at the top because they're starving. So remember, bees work upward. If you push the queen down and had everything set for winter and they've gobbled all this up, You pop the top and right there they are. I would much rather have the insurance policy of having a sugar block there, some fondant, or a winter patty, which has low amount of pollen, not a pollen patty, but a winter patty, that it would hold them over for a couple days. And then my decision, do I combine two colonies? Do I have honey in the freezer? And what's my options? And then you can take that when you need to.
When do you put winter patties in? November, December, January?
I put them in right around the first week of December.
Oh, do you? Okay.
Because
And
I
thereafter,
don't want to feed. Yep. If you start to feed, then keep feeding.
Oh, okay.
So if you go out there, let's just say you make some sugar bricks, and all of a sudden let's just say late December, you notice all the bees are coming up top and they're eating on that. Make sure you keep giving it to them, because when you hit, it's like in springtime, people put in pollen patties to build up the bees, and that's great. But then they don't feed them. They let them eat that one patty and build up, but the pollen's still not coming in. The maples haven't come in. Nothing else is coming in. And all of a sudden they go, Jamie, my colony died. Well, why did it die? What'd you do? Well, I started feeding. Well, did you keep feeding? So remember, if you start feeding, keep feeding.
Yeah.
If you have enough honey to do that, that's fine. I mean, just keep putting in, like John. Gail's in the same situation. She has excess honey in her freezer that she can take a box, thaw the box out, and I'll say that over and over because I had a beekeeper put on a frozen box on top of a 90-degree colony and killed them. So get your box out of the deep freeze or out of your garage, depending where you have it securely done up. Let it thaw out. Go out and check your apiary, and you turn on pop. Let's say this is December 27th, John. You go out to your apiary, you open up one box, and right there's the entire colony looking at you. Close it back up, go back to your house, get your gear, get everything you need to, go back out, hit the bees, light your smoker, hit the bees, drive them down a little bit, put the honey box on top. You just bought yourself another 2 to 3 weeks easy.
Yeah.
And that's why I say, if you have excess honey to store some back, because I would much rather. What's that?
Or you can use the winter patty.
Winter patty, December.
Yeah. Just December only.
No, leave it in, put it in at December time, and then if they don't need it, they won't touch it. And then in that April, May, if it's still there, and they've had enough down below, then you can take it, put it in a Ziploc bag, throw it in the freezer for next year.
Should I look in January and February real quick to see what's going on with the winter patty? No?
Absolutely. Okay. Anytime that I have time, and everybody knows this. I mean, we're all older people here. I didn't mean that as an insult, but you guys know. Okay, well, you guys know when it's the dead of winter and it's freezing and nasty. All of a sudden, you'll maybe get that one day where there's no wind. It's the sun's out nice and bright and it's warming things up. Don't be afraid of putting on some boots and go out there. And it only takes, depending on the amount of colonies, take your hive tool with you, put your veil on, because if it's nice and white, it's nice and warm outside, you'll have a girl that comes up and gets you in the face. Put a veil on. If not, just your upper jacket, pop the tops and just go through real quick. All you're doing is you're just putting the hive tool in, popping it up. Don't rack the hive, but pop the top and look. Is there moisture? Is there excessive moisture? Yes or no? Instantly off the top of your head. If I'm going to feed an emergency feed, is it still there? And number 3, where's the colony? If you look down, you're not taking off the inner cover. So if you look down through the slot and that colony, there's only a few bees, and you might see 10, 15 bees up in the emergency food. That's fine. As long as I can go through that real quick. So how many bees, moisture, and what's going on? And then boom, close it back up. I mean, 4 seconds tops. Because number 1, you don't want to keep that off because all that heat's pouring out, and that colony has to work overtime then to buzz and gyrate against each other to make up that distance. So what I'm saying is, for like you, John, or Gail, that's you got distance, don't pop the top on these things like you see some people on YouTube, and then go to the town or go to get your stuff, then walk back. That colony is, I mean, it takes so much for them to gyrate to get that heat back up. So you go down, let's just say you got 4 hives. you check your hives, and there's one colony that there was a lot of bees up top, maybe a few hundred. Okay, do I got honey? You know, go through the process of what you have in inventory. And then, okay, I got a box of honey. I got let's say you have a medium of honey. You look at the other ones. All the bees are down deep. They haven't touched the emergency feed. You're good to go. You go back, you get your honey box, thaw it out. Maybe you have to take it back the next day because you have to let it thaw out. Go out, check that colony. So anytime you get those warm shots, maybe a day, maybe two at a time, go out, take that half hour or whatever, go out and check your colonies real quick. And then in your head, you can go check mark. Okay, I went out and checked my colonies. Moisture's good. You know, the bees weren't up there, and you're good for another 2-3 weeks. Go out and check it again. You know, I always try to do it at least once a month minimum, but don't ever go out there when it's that 60-mile-an-hour wind, snowing and blowing. If we ever have a storm, the only thing I go out and check is make sure that upper entrance is open. It might not, the landing board might be full of dead bees and ice and everything else, but make sure that upper entrance is open. And then if you want to, make sure you have a ratchet strap around your colony. Is it a high area where it might pop the top off? Or do you have an 8-cylinder brick on top or some mason bricks or whatever else? Or do you have straps? If there's a high windstorm and other things, it ain't bad every once in a while to go back. I take the Envoy and I drive back the lane and I just look at the colonies. Do they look okay? Are they knocked over? I mean, what's going on with them? So it's an easy 2-minute check per colony. You could check a whole apiary in less than 3-4 minutes and then assess what you need.
So question, Jamie.
Yep.
What temperature, when you're doing this, should you not want to open up? And then the other question is, what is the safe temperature that you should open it up? Does that make sense?
Yep. I would do this even if it was 10 degrees out, because you're only popping that up to instantly take a look at it and close it back up. That excess heat in the top might be 97 degrees. And when you pop it open, it's just flushing out real quick. You're taking a look, assessing those 3 things: population, what's up top, moisture content, and if they're on the feed, and close it right back up.
Can you do that with a pillow box?
If I have a moisture board.
1 second, John. What'd you say, Jen?
Oh,
Can you do
sorry.
the same thing when there's a pillow box up top. I mean, it's not going to have the inner cover, so.
If you had a pillow top, what you can do is take your hands and you can just crack it real quick and look underneath. You're not going to have the moisture problem, and you're not going to have the emergency feed. Or there's some pillow boxes, depending on who you bought, that have a place to put that extra feed.
Okay.
Some people will take their hands and scrape the mulch out. I shouldn't say mulch, but the wood chips, and you can look down through it that way. I've always taken, when I had a couple colonies, I'd take my hive tool, shove it in between, and open it up and take a peek. But you're not going to have the moisture problem, which is nice with those. I wish I had like 100 of them, but it's extra expensive. Then you got to store them and everything else. The pillow tops are the best. It's extra expense. And the nice thing is you can pop that and take a look and put it right back down.
Can they still get moisture in there with that on there?
Because they'll go up, the wet chips that are in it, they'll go up and drink the wet chips.
Oh, okay.
So if you have bees around a pond, the bees aren't in the water. They're not in that water. They're up in the beach area along the edge where that clay or that sand is, where it's wet and dry. Just as it's getting damp, that's where they're sticking their tongues down and they're just pulling the moisture out of it. And they do the same thing with wood chips. If they get a cleansing flight in where they can get in and get out, or it's, let's say, in the springtime where it's that 40, 45, 50 degrees, they'll come out and you'll see them against bark, any type of moss or anything growing. They'll sit and drink out of it and then fly back. Or if you have wood chip pile, you'll see them in the wood chips all the time, or in mulch piles in the springtime. What's your question, John?
So I might have a top cover, and if I have a moisture board, so I pop the top cover, then I also pop the moisture board and look at the inner cover. Is that
Yep.
In these pillow boxes are like a empty box with a screen on them that has wood chips or something?
Yep.
that are made by, are they purchasable or do you
Yeah.
make them?
No, and you can make them. You can take a medium box, and what
Okay.
they do around the outside edge is drill holes. You'll see some of them that have tons of holes, other ones that don't. Tim Arheight has some, and he puts holes all the way around it. You can put in chunks of newspaper. So if you have a resource, and I'm not saying this to be unlegal, but if you have somebody that has a mail or a newspaper box nearby, put in your 50 cents and take all the ones in the middle of the night. Not saying to do it. So they got all the excess ones. That if you have somebody that does recycling, take those extra chunks of newspaper, take each sheet, wad it up into a loose ball, and you can put all the newspapers in the top. Newspaper pulls moisture. Once they get soppy wet, you just take them out, throw them out, put new newspaper in.
Okay.
Okay. You want, if so, say the same way with cedar chips or wood chips, that eventually that center area is going to get overly wet and nasty. That's why I say go out with extra clean stuff. The bees will pull off of that, but if it gets too nasty, it's going to start growing mold. Because remember, the bees are pushing up that 90+ degrees, and it's wet, cold. What happens? Wet, cold, and wet, or wet and warm makes mold. So go out there every once in a while, pull out the newspaper that's wet, put in new wood chips the same way, cedar chips same way.
So you have a top cover and then
Top cover, pillow
yeah.
box, but you're not using an inner cover then.
Okay, that's what I was
taking
gonna
that
ask.
out of the equation.
All right.
Yep.
Thank you.
So it's just another gadget and gizmo.
One more question.
Yes, ma'am.
So if you're adding on an extra box of honey to feed, is that
Okay.
creating too much room?
I would.
Now they got to go all the way up to the top past the empty feed areas.
Okay. If there's a couple scenarios on this, okay, and you tell me if I'm right or wrong. You're talking about in the winter time, if they went up, correct,
Yes,
and that box was empty, and putting a honey box on top.
right.
Yes. Okay. Because the whole colony, as a colony, remember the queen's always going to be dead center of this mass. As they come up, okay, first of all, they come up and then they come up the center first because they're keeping the warmth. Remember, they're not warming up the entire colony like we warm up a house. Only the colony's warm. And then they'll move to the left and eat that up, and then they'll try to move to the right. So our best thing is we hope that there's days that they can, inside the colony, that it's over that 50 degrees so they can break cluster and move over to where the honey's at. All right. As they do that, that whole box, once it's empty, they'll move up to the next section. I can really show you better and I'll try to pop up the pictures on my flare unit. When you take a flare unit that hooks to your phone, you can see the hot spot. It's in the center, starting the winter. Then it moves up and it moves left and right, moves up, left, right, and they'll come up. They'll never go up, eat all the honey, and then move back down. So you'll really not have an empty box as per se, as it is. They'll be empty. That they've already eaten everything out of it. As you try to come up and see that colony on that inner cover through the slot or a hole, depending on what style you have. Man Lake has holes, or I think vice versa. Better Bee has a hole, 2-inch hole. Man Lake and Dayton have slots. So if you look down through that slot and you see all the bees, I mean, thousands of bees coming up through it, you know that they're starved up to that point. Then have your honey box ready, thawed out, go out, smoker lit, veil on, sealed up, pop that inner cover open, smoke the bees, drive them down, put your honey on top, put the inner cover back on the next box that you took out, put it back together. So that way, when they keep coming up, then they'll come up into the next box that let's say this is February. You thought you had enough honey on. And remember, people, it doesn't matter how much, we always say the 150 plus, but if you had a young queen that went out and got mated, or a performing like Gail's, she's got a fat gold queen that's just laying like crazy. They might consume a little bit of honey and be the perfect colony and go right through winter and have and still have honey. A more aggressive colony, depending on the population, might burn up that entire box and be starving by January. So when as they're always coming up, you're always going to try to keep ahead of them and keep honey above them. If they get to the top, so Jen, say you didn't have any honey left and they're in that top box, you popped it open and there they are looking at you. Then at that point, start thinking, you know, maybe put on a shim and then put in winter patties and start making sugar blocks. If you have no other way to feed them, then I do that. I do that like it's called the old Hail Mary pass. Everything's going wrong. Throw fondant, winter patties, sugar blocks, do everything you can to get to them. If we get into February, let's say we get into March and April, and it's still cold outside a little bit during the day, you could go out and put a 1-to-1 sugar water on, or a 2-to-1, so 2 parts water, 1 part sugar, and kind of create an artificial nectar flow, as long as that jar does not freeze. So I usually take them out in the morning, put them on, and then by night, when I watch the temperatures dip, then I pull it back off. So at least they're getting something. If you get into that starvation where you have nothing left. Does that answer your question?
Yep, thanks.
Okay. One other thing that we did wrong, and it's not you personally. All of a sudden you open it up, Jen can relate, Madeline can relate. You open it up, the colony's gone, and this year I just sat in on a queen. There was probably 30 queen rearing people. This year was a weird year for queens that came in or went out and got mated. Either the queen rearer done it or the bees themselves made a queen. They went out, mated, came back, laid some brood up, and the colony superseded them. Right now, ODA is asking us to, with Barb, is asking the queen rearing people that in the spring to send in 10 queens of each one of our colonies. So after I start grafting, they want to see if it's a queen problem through genetics. Dave Tarpey's going to do the testing. Or is it drone problem? So once drones start coming out, we're going to start collecting drones. But all across Ohio, we've seen this. I thought it was just my problem in my area. It's across the entire state. And Michigan, we call him Green Toe. He's kind of extravagant, and he paints one of his toenails green. That long story, but he's a really good beekeeper, and he's part of the Michigan, and they're having the same kind of problem. So now each state is we're going to try to break some testing down, send a bunch of bees to North Carolina to have genetics spun out to see if we're getting a bottleneck in genetics. Because remember, if your mated queen goes out and mates with a drone of her same genetics or genetic makeup, we're getting that bottleneck. So where the bees come back, she comes back, even though she's mated, she starts laying up some brood, and all of a sudden she gets superseded. That's not normal for bees to do, unless she went out and done an inferior flight or something wrong. We do have pockets in our area that not just wrong, but have went completely the opposite side. Gail's area. Every queen that's went out has come back and been a super, super girl. So I'm talking to Roger here currently that we're going to talk about doing some grafting in the spring with, if you have a colony that overwintered with strong genetics, and we can kind of prove that. Gail's probably the best at this in our entire club, that she's checking her mites. She's putting them underneath a microscope. We're checking for drones, that we're going to do some I&I where the entire club in our area is going to get together, and we're going to graft the best queens of all these colonies, take them out to the apiary and graft maybe 130 queens. And then all of our club members are going to get some of these queens. And then we're going to ask you just to take notes on it. So we're going to give everybody some queens in the spring. Once we get to queen rearing season, it's not going to be immediate because we have to have drones first, but we're going to try to do that. Give everybody in the club at least 2 or 3 queens, and then ask you to do the science behind it. Did it build up faster than the other ones? Did she get superseded? So when we're going to try to take this data in our area, so we know what's going on. Adam McDowell, he's had a great, great year, but his queens have been superseded. Every time he takes mating flights, his queens take mating flights, they come back, they get superseded. Some of his girls are on the 4th and 5th supersedure. So he's going to have to combine about 13 hives. He'll probably go down to probably 4 or 5. So just know it's not your fault all the time. But no, when you try to get a supersedure cell, you want the queen cell that looks as fat around as your thumb, not that little tiny dainty. And if you've seen enough queen cells, or your experience, Jen's probably experienced now, Madeline's probably the same with her dad, the little tiny cells, take your hive tool, cut them out. If you have two of them on the same frame that are nice and fat, put it back together. The best queen wins at that point. One will emerge and kill the other. If they emerge at the same time, one will kill the other, and then she'll go out and take a mating flight. And sometimes she won't make it back, and they'll have to raise another queen. So just know that that's going on and what steps you need to take. And if all else, ask. So remember, queen cells versus queen cups. All our bees love queen cups. And you guys, as first-year beekeepers, have probably seen a lot of cups. Except off here to the right, when it starts to get pulled out, you put it over the sun over your shoulder, you look down inside. If there's royal jelly in a larvae, now we're looking at this, lower left. We've seen copious amounts of royal jelly. The queens are always fed royal jelly the entire time. Now we have a fat larvae inside. If you accidentally tear one open, and it's easy to do because they'll build that queen cell out from the frame, and they might connect it to the next frame, or they build it on the bottom edge of a box, and as you tear the next frame up, the bottom of it was connected to the other frame. If you tear it open and see this, look and see how much royal jelly's in there, and then try to save one or two queen cells. So the ones that have emerged, remember on day 10, day 9 to 10, if that cell is capped, that old queen is probably gone. If it's still open and short, like in the upper right, that old queen might still be in that box. So if on the average, all the cells are that little short where they just started to get long, do a full hive inspection. If you find the old queen, take the old queen with a frame of brood and make a split. And then let these queen cells emerge. Let them do their mother nature thing, go out and take a flight, and then assess and see if she's a good queen. If not, you can take the old queen, put her back in, and start this over. On day 10, you're going to see in this third picture, going from left to right, that cell is capped. That means on day 10, and that'll go all the way to day 16. So I can't tell you if I see it capped. I don't know if it's got capped on day 10. Is that cell at 11, 12, 13, 14? 15. At 16, the tip of this is going to start to get thinned out, and you're just going to see that little cocoon. If you open it up and you see the end of it's completely open, like the old Boy Scout or the Girl Scout, you got the old can opener that you used to have to manually do. If you see the tip of that completely open like a trap door, that means you got a virgin queen running around in your colony. Don't go to try to find her because it is hard, because she's not developed in the rear end. Her abdomen is not, all 50 fallopian tubes are kicked in. They're all squatted up because she hasn't taken her maiden flight yet. And then that'll tell you. So put it together on your notes. Don't not check that hive for another week and a half. Let her go out. Let her spread her QMP. If I seen this with one cell that was open, and if you notice the other one beside it's not, you could actually take that frame then, make sure all the bees are off of it, and put that into another nuke and do another split, because this other queen's going to emerge. Or if you had JBZ or California cages, you could, because they were all laid about the same time, you could take this other queen, put her in a cage, and sell her for $15 for a virgin queen to somebody in the club. So tons of options. And remember, give them room as soon as ASAP. So if you have a colony in the springtime, or, and the only reason I'm not trying to tease John, but if you feed them up too much and they backfill, you can get a late swarm. A virgin or a mated queen, right now, always know what a good pattern looks like. You know, this is a spotty brood pattern. This is a shotgun pattern. That queen, even though you love Miss Eleanor, and I'm just going to tease Gail real quick, or you have your queens called out or by name, if they start to shut down like this, they're done. Just be done with it. But also look inside this frame and see, you know, it looks like a shotgun pattern, but also notice this. Here's a dead larvae. Here's sunken cappings. They're not domed up, but they're domed under. And look and see what's going on and kind of do an assessment. If all else, take pictures of it and contact an inspector, myself, or somebody around and say, hey, you know, right down here we have some dried larvae. This could be EFB. It could be a colony that collapsed because they didn't have pollen, because you don't see any pollen stored. There's no extra honey stored. And what's wrong with it? So make sure if you don't know, ask questions. Not that a lot of you seen it this year. You could have or might not have. Multiple eggs all over the place. This is a laying worker. And at that point, that means you have not checked that colony in the last 20 plus days. And it's either your fault or it might not be your fault. It could be a family situation went on. And we had a guy in Hicksville that had 2 beautiful colonies when I checked them in late May. I think the 1st of June. Beautiful colonies. He's taken the class about 4 years ago. I was over that way, headed towards Fort Wayne. Stopped in to see him because I don't see him all the time. Stopped in. His colonies were beautiful. And within a very short time, because of his daughter having a wreck, his wife has health conditions. I went over last time. Every box is filled with hive beetle and larvae. And when we tilted the hive forward, the hive beetle larvae were crawling out the front entrance. So in this case, it's a laying worker. It is if you can find a laying worker, I'll take a knee to you because you're better than me. But at this point, if there's laying workers, it's going to look like every other worker. That means her butt is too small to go down and touch the bottom of the cell, and she's got to come back up. So you'll see this on top of multiple eggs. You'll see this she'll lay eggs on top of pollen. She'll lay eggs on top of honey. She'll lay them on the bottom. She'll lay them all over the place. Then you got to take this colony, and it's called a shook swarm, tear the whole entire colony down, take all the frames of bees, take them out about 50 to 75 feet away from all your colonies, shake every bee off into the grass. Put the boxes back together, either take all the frames and freeze them for 24 hours, because if not, these are all going to be drones. Every one of them is going to be drones. And then what happens by the time the sun goes down, all those bees will go inside of other colonies. And what will happen is the laying workers that have developed, that means their fallopian tubes have kicked in a little bit. If they hit the front entrance and they smell like a competing queen, what happens? That colony will come out and kill her. So now you don't have to worry about her going into another colony and starting that same kind of mess. Tons and tons of pollen. You'll see frames that have actually built up so much pollen that they're starting to backfill. And this isn't really something that goes wrong, but know that if you see the white in between, so you'll see a larvae, but tons and tons of pollen, that means they're just running out of room. So that means you haven't checked your colony within the last 20 days. So just know, always keep a check on what's going on. There should have been a whole area for the queen to lay. There should have been a football size. This is that laying drone or laying worker, and all the brood should be nice and flat. This is all those larvae that are popping up and look like 22 shells all lined around. That means this whole entire colony. If you look at the bees, notice the bees have hardly any fur on them. So this was a mite count problem. You had pollen on the top, but laying workers started, and now you have all these drones that are trying to be fed. The whole entire colony will crash. And just know this is what you should see. If you have 20, 30 frames of this, you're cooking with jet fuel. Just know what a nice pattern looks like, and roughly 10% drones, either here in the corner, along the bottom. Most queens prefer right along the bottom edge. And when you take the frames apart, just a real quickie, if you have double boxes, so a deep over deep or medium over medium, in between these frames, if you pull this frame up and find larvae between the two, that is not wax moth or hive beetle larvae. That is drones that the bees are just packing any area up so she can lay tons of drones. In the springtime, when we start seeing lots of drones, that's when swarm season kicks up because she's laying tons of sons getting ready to take that maiden flight and take half the workforce with her. So just know what a good pattern looks like. In the wintertime, all the bees that you probably see right now, half of that colony is going to be dead before we get into December. If you have time, if you're going to be that diligent beekeeper, don't be afraid to go out. Make sure you have your veil on at least. I would light a smoker just in case things get a little epic. What you're doing, you're taking like a dowel rod, a broomstick, or anything that's at least a ½ inch tall. Go out in the winter and don't be afraid of removing that front entrance and taking that tool and reaching in there. Even if you have somebody that can make a little hook, like a little hockey stick, reach back in there and pull out the dead bees. This is also an opportunity to take a ½ cup of these dead bees and do an alcohol wash, because these were all the summer bees that didn't have that Vitagelin and all that fat little body. They've all died. And take a mite count and then see what your mite count is. You might be surprised. You don't have to do this, but if you're not going to do this, make sure they always have an upper entrance to go out and make a cleansing flight. They can get that excess moisture out and do that different stuff. But if you want to, this is a good idea to do, because all these dead bees in the bottom, if they sit and they get into springtime in that February, March, they'll start to mold on that bottom board. And then when we do rotations in the springtime, all these bees will be moldy and the board will be moldy. So if you want to keep things clean, you can go out and do that. If you find a colony that's dead and you see, here's all their butts looking at you. If you open up a frame and they're doing the major moon at you, that means they've starved and all died. Or they're sick because of too much of varroa, and they've actually just died into place. So if you open it up and all their heads are sticking in, that means they're down there licking every drop and they're starving and they've all died. So this was the last little bit of honey. By looking at the frame, it's not too bad, but there are tons of propolis, so it's not the greatest frame in the world, but they died of starvation. What happens in the next one, this is what I talked about with that mold. If you leave a colony and it gets that super warm and they went in there and starved or they died, this is that white gray mold. This will get into the wax and just keep spreading out on the entire frame. And at that point, chuck the frame. If it's one little tiny corner and you have wax foundation, cut it out. You'll have to go around the wires if you have wired foundation. If you have a hive tool, and it was just this little pocket, freeze the frame, take the bees, do an alcohol wash, kind of inspect and look at every frame and see why they died. If you have no idea, take pictures, document it all. In this, all the cells are domed up. That looks good. Got a couple open cell there. She's down starved. Not too bad, but I would dig underneath and you'll find that queen in the center of that little pile. But get this thing cleaned up immediately before that mold gets into the wax and starts getting everything nasty. Remember the DOA? Dead on arrival. You opened up your colony either November, December, January, February, or March, and your colony was dead. Don't just instantly, and kind of remember, don't instantly just tear it apart and go, yep, it's dead. Do the research behind why it died. Was it something that you did wrong? Even if you did, and I'm just going to say this, Mr. Dravis passed away, so I'll say this for the goodness of him. His very first year, he said, Jamie, he says, we're elderly, and Mrs. Dravis is a great lady. They said, can we have our colony on your property? And I said, absolutely. He had it on one side of my pond, and you guys have been to my house. He had it right by the driveway. He did everything correct. He had 2-inch insulation over the winter time. I checked his mites. They were down to 1. It was late October, November. He had the mouse guard on. Every frame was filled with honey. Every gap of bees was filled. And I had a 5/5 nuke, so not even a good colony to go over winter. It was one of them queens that I had just grafted. She's a young queen. They made it through wintertime, and he did everything correct. Insulation on the top, ventilation perfectly, everything done. My nuke made it through winter, and his died. Mother Nature also takes a course in this. And I always say that 5%, Mother Nature, even if you do everything correct, you do a post-mortem, you know, you got the whole thing. You're insecting, you're dissecting, you're looking, you're taking pictures. Do all that stuff, and just know sometimes you can just say to yourself, it's Mother Nature. So what did we do wrong on here? Spotty brood. You got pinholes. You got some sunken cappings here, here. And is that queen laying a nice pattern? Absolutely not. So off with her head. Either you buy another queen, or if this colony was going on like that and you could find the queen, kill her, put her in some alcohol to make a bait hive or make QMP out of her. If I had 2 colonies, take this frame out, get rid of it, and then put in a frame of eggs from your other healthy colony and see if they'll raise another queen. If there's enough good resources or a good population of bees, if you want to make your own queens up or turn on and make a superior queen. So hive A is your best colony. She's the best queen, has the best genetics. She's doing everything right. Hive B is just suffering. Don't be afraid of killing that queen off and put in a frame of eggs, bam, in colony B. Make sure you don't take the queen with that on that frame, but double check it. Make sure you're not taking the queen. Take a frame of eggs, stick it in colony B, and off to the races they're running. The other thing to do is to take a frame of cap brood, and it's called equalization. So you're trying to equalize out the colonies. If you have one colony A that's doing absolutely wonderful, she's got 2 or 3 frames of cap brood, pouring it on. And hive B, you know, she's just kind of struggling a bit. Take 2 frames of cap brood. Remember, if that's completely laid up, there's 8,000 cells. Take 16,000 bees on a capped frame and stick it in your other colony and boost them numbers up. Because all them nurse bees that come out, all the nurse bees become house bees, become foragers. So it's pushing the timeline up for all what they're doing. All these nurse bees come out, and now they're the new nurse bees and house bees. All your foragers, or all the old bees that were in there, become foragers. And all of a sudden, Mel Dissicone says, if you take 5 frames of cap brood and slap it in any big colony, you can have up to 100 pounds of honey come in within a 6-week period. And it's in his book. Any questions on that? So those are some of the things that we see at the end of the year, and taking your notes is probably the best thing to do. Take notes, even though in John's case, and as new beekeepers, you don't always understand what you're looking at. But I'll try to help you out, and we'll walk through all that different stuff.
When do you, like right now, I'm kind of iffy on my queen. Should I, well, it's not a fair question because you haven't seen the frames. Some of the frames are all right. Some are more spotty. So she's like an okay queen, in my humble opinion. Should I winter with her, do you think, or off with her head? And I mean,
Okay.
there's a time frame here
Yep.
where I probably don't want to get rid of the queen. And are we approaching that?
Okay. Here right now, because we just got out of a dearth, I would turn on check. I have a little checklist in the fall, because everybody, when we get into these dearths like this, my phone rings off the hook and emails, and I need a queen, need a king, need a queen. When we get into a dearth, remember what happens. The queen quits laying because they quit feeding her. There's a lack of pollen or nectar coming in, and they're kind of shutting down. Plus, we're on that back hill slide of getting ready for winter. A way to check that, John, is take little pieces of pollen and put on a 1-to-1 sugar water and make them think that there's a flow going on. And all of a sudden, if you see that pattern getting better, then you know that it's a resource problem than it is a queen problem. If you give them resources and she still does that, as long as that frame, when you look at a frame, I always say if half the frame If you look at it and at least half the frame is, or more than half the frame to 3/4 is brood, I call it a brood frame. If it's pollen, then I call it a pollen frame. So you kind of estimate or guess that, how many frames are brood, how many frames are pollen, how many frames are honey. And I kind of give it a score. So I know that when I open up a box, she's got 7 frames of brood, 2 frames of pollen, and the rest are honey. If that brood pattern starts to get to that shotgun effect, and I've stimulated her with pollen, I've stimulated the colony with 1-to-1 sugar water, and she hasn't kicked it up, then start thinking at this point, and we are at a critical date here in the next month. Number 1, can I get a queen? You cannot at this point start and put eggs in there and expect them to draw out a queen and let her get mated, because now we're at day 1 or 2 with the egg. By the time it emerges at 16, she goes out and takes a mating flight, starts to lay. We're a month and a half away.
Right.
That's going to push us way past. She'll never get a mating flight. Do I have the resources to buy a mated queen? Well, the only one I know that's still doing stuff is Mark down towards he's just below Marysville, above Worcester. He's got them. So can I get in a mated queen quick? Is it somewhere I can drive to or somewhere he can overnight it? But there comes an expense of that. When you buy something this late, they're going through the same problems that we're going through. So did you pay, let's just say by the time you bought a mated queen at $40, had overnight shipping at $25, is it worth $75 to buy a mated queen from somebody else that might make it through winter or might not? Or sometimes do you cut your losses and say, okay, the queen, let's just say she's laying a shotgun pattern. I put in pollen, put in 1-to-1, but she's got a good sized colony. Off with her head and take colony A. That's my best queen, or it could be colony B. Open up the top, take off the excess honey off the top, but I'm looking for brood. So if you find that little bit of half honey, half brood underneath, put in a sheet of newspaper, take colony B or colony A that's suffering and set it on top. And you're going to combine those two together. And over the next week or maybe 2-3 weeks, they'll come around and combine. That workforce will chew through the newspaper. They'll combine up. They'll move some honey up. That brood, once it emerges, it'll come down. And now you really combined. And now you know that colony is going to make it through wintertime. Andrew Carlin's probably the best at this. I'm getting better at it because here's the thing. Why have an iffy hive go through winter if you know in the back of your head you go, yeah, she's probably going to die. If they had resources. If you open it up and there's this little tiny ball of bees, yes, combine it instantly. And that's that always proverbial, will she make it through winter or not? The nice thing is if you combine them together and now you know every gap of bees, every gap is filled. Now they got tons and tons of resources, tons of winter bees. They're going to make it through winter. For us, it's like my dad that lives in Florida. If I could raise bees 24/7, they have no brood breaks. Their queens lay all the way through wintertime. I went down to Christmas Day, December 25th or 26th, and we were grafting in Florida. Our selection process up here is wintertime. Good genetics, good bees, good healthy bees, and beekeepers. That Mother Nature of that wintertime is the ones that select out who's doing it right and who's doing it wrong. Or the genetics might be right or wrong. But if you combine 2, maybe 3 hives together to get through winter. In the winter or in the springtime, you take that colony out of spring, then you can turn around and make a split. If you're chasing numbers, now you can take one colony, split it 3 times. If you want a colony plus a little bit of honey, do 1 split, do an artificial swarm, and then you're back to 2 colonies again, and you build up again. That strong colony, let's say you get into June, it starts to really get overpopulated, pulling in some good honey, take another couple frames off. We've all seen queen cells, right? What if all of a sudden she gets overly built and you find 2 different frames with queen cells, right, Gail? Then what do? You take the 2 frames with queen cells on it, and you make 2 more splits. You can always increase by making more splits, but you have to do it with healthy bees. And you have to get through the winter time. Hardest part of Northwest Ohio. And that proverbial question that you guys all think about, how bad's winter going to be? No idea. Read the Farmer's Almanac, the best thing I can tell you. And even then, it's guesswork. So why don't we take let's say a 7-minute break? And then if a couple of you have questions, I'll go ahead and stay on. And we'll take a break, go stretch your legs, and then we'll go through the second presentation. And then after that, John, if you want to stick around for a little bit, we'll put up the whiteboard and we'll draw some stuff out of what you guys have. So any of you that are still on here, Mandelin's on here, Jen, Gail, Lisa, you don't have bees yet, so you can sit and learn if you have time, and we'll draw what you guys tell me what's going on. I'll draw it out, and then we'll talk through it and see what we got. Help each other out.
I just have one question, Jamie.
Yeah.
In my office, because I've got frames that I have extracted the honey out of,
Okay.
and they're in containers. There's actually 4 medium boxes. Now, when you said about the crystals, do I have to put, let's say, one of the boxes, okay, they're stacked on top of each other, they're in a sealed, like a Tupperware.
Yep.
So the bottom, do I just put the crystals with the newspaper on the top box or both boxes?
If you have a sealed container like that,
Yes.
just put it like off to the left or right, wherever you got a little bit of room. Put a little piece of newspaper and just put a little thing of crystals.
Okay.
Because it's sealed, the only reason we do it, we put them on top, is when you, for most, and I'll have to go out to Dwight Wilson's, take some pictures. He stacks 15 tall. All right. So he puts a solid 3/4 inch plywood on the bottom to make sure it's nice and flat, because concrete might give or this or that. Plus he's in an old barn. So he puts that down first and then puts 3 boxes of old drawn comb. So after he extracts, he freezes it for everything goes through the freezer for 24 hours. Then he takes them out 3 at a time, puts them on the plywood, or these little plywood things that he has cut out. He puts 3 high, puts the vapor in it. Okay. Puts the newspaper, moth
Okay.
crystals. Then he puts another 3/4 inch chunk of plywood. The next 3 pulls that plywood off, puts the next 3, puts crystals on. Because the off-gassing of the crystals, they come downward.
Okay.
What he's looking for is that flow of the crystals coming out and off-gassing those 2 to 3 boxes, and then the one underneath that will off-gas and come down 2 to 3 boxes. So for him, it's a vertical fall. If he had somewhere where he was, let's just say you had a walk-in freezer where you know when you slam that door shut, it's solidly sealed, then you wouldn't have to do that. Some commercial beekeepers, when you get to like Stoller's honey, he's got a garage that's like that. It's called his cold room, where he can take the entire room and bring it down to 30 some odd degrees or crank it up to 90 some odd degrees. As they have that room like that, they do that. They take 5-gallon buckets of crystals, open them up, and set them in all the corners of the building, and it off-gasses the entire building. In your case, you're just doing it on a small scale. That snap of that lid is going to hold those vapors in there, and your vapors might last a lot longer than it is with someone like Dwight or myself, because the gaps where the bodies come together,
Uh-huh.
where do you take your hive tool and dig? You're digging them in the corners. So we open them up. So my crystals, when they off gas, if I have a bunch of gaps or 5/8 holes drilled in and I forgot to tape one up, they off gas a lot quicker. As where yours is going to off gas maybe a much slower, I would presume. And you
Right.
got it in that sealed container. Yeah, nothing's going to get in, nothing's going to get back out.
Excuse me. Well, I left both of the Tupperware containers with the 4 boxes in my office because it's air conditioned, and I
Yep.
didn't want to put them in the back. Fear to the fact is there's all kinds of crap out there. You know, I don't
Well-
want them to get contaminated, so they're in my office.
Well, even if you had them sealed up like that, I wouldn't be afraid of putting them out in the garage then. I mean,
Okay.
put them off to the side. Even if you had, and mice hate moth crystals, even
Yeah.
if you had something get into it that's going to drive them off. But don't put it back where you're not going to see it. I mean, something you could go out and take a visual check and go, yeah, it looks good. I can pop the top. Yep, moth crystals, boom, and close it up. I wouldn't worry about that. But and once we get into winter, the wax moth are done.
Okay.
I mean, that those females then are those are the ones that are in the larval state. They're the ones that are going to bury in the ground about 1.5 feet, and then they have. I'm trying to think of the name of it. It's like antifreeze for their body. It's like what bumblebees have, hornets have. They actually go into a thermal shock where they just basically freeze.
Okay.
Springtime, once it gets 45, 50 and starts to warm up, warms their body back up. Bumblebees can just sit and gyrate, warm themselves up to 80 some odd degrees, start making flights. Hornets don't do it as much. They wait till that I think their range is 50 to 60.
Okay. Yeah, because they've worked these frames out, I mean, so quickly. I just
Yep.
don't want them destroyed.
Yeah. And honestly, I've asked this question from a lot of older beekeepers. I said, what is a frame, let's say a deep or a medium, all drawn out comb, what's it worth? I've heard from $100 a piece, $25 a piece. They said, if it's nice yellow first year comb, you know, it's like having an entire house that all the cupboards are there, all the furniture's made, everything's it. You take that drawn comb and stick it into a box, that queen can instantly start laying. They
Well,
can
that's what I'm
yeah.
thinking.
Yep,
Yeah.
they can instantly start putting pollen, honey, nectar, anything into it, and it's all ready to go.
Because
You know,
I've got like 38 frames.
You're sitting on a gold mine then,
Yeah, that's why I'm being very
Yep.
protective.
and it is. I mean, and you can talk to Roger or any of the older beekeepers, ask them what's the most valuable thing in their apiary, and then 99% of the time they'll all say a drawn comb, a drawn box of comb.
Yep.
And then when you have things like, Sonny Ward, he buys an 8x8 shed and he's only running like 10 colonies. So it's big enough for what his operation was, but he throws them all in the shed. They got gigantic gaps where these things aren't, and it's not like a home. It's not like seals and everything else. He throws in moth crystals, doesn't worry about it. All the moth crystals are gone. He calls me and he goes, every box I pull apart, there's wax moth everywhere. And I said, number one, you've now contaminated your area because now you're going to have wax moth population all summer long into the fall. They were overrunning his full-size colonies because there were such numbers at night. So I told him, I said, my best recommendation is take the hives and leave and make another out yard, or go buy 4 or 5 big commercial insect zappers, or mosquito zappers,
Yeah.
and set them out at night. John and Bev Gray, you know John and Bev,
Yeah.
they put the big bug zappers over the top of the pond, out hanging over their pond.
Wow.
So as the wax moth and stuff zapped, he took the bottom tray off of it. So they just go from there, they fall in the water, and the bluegill and everything ate them up. I mean, it's just thinking outside the box. John's really good about thinking outside the box.
Well, I don't want to gas out my other staff members that are in my office area in the
Yeah.
education building.
Yeah, I wouldn't be afraid, Gail, of just taking them after it's sealed, everything's in there. Put a little tiny pile, maybe a 1 inch round pile,
Mhm.
something. Put them in a room where you can get to them accessible. That let's just say check it once a month. You pop it open and see how much it's off gas. Make sure it's okay. Some critter hasn't got into it. Stamp it back up. You're good to go.
Okay. All
You know,
righty.
my mistake of raising all mine was I just got so jammed up with Dwight Tirani calling me and saying, hey, I got more frames of pollen. I went out and got put box over box over box over box. Went through winter fine, got through summer. And I started using some to make nukes in the spring, because when people buy a nuke from me, I always take a frame of pollen, slam it in there too. So I know when they get home, that thing's just going to absolutely explode. So when you're doing that, then all of a sudden I just kept forgetting about the pollen, or I forgot about the crystals.
Right.
3 or 4 months go by. Midsummer, I'm not making splits. In the fall, I go to lift the box and I hear this where all that spider webbing's getting pulled apart. And and then I pulled it away from the wall and they were eating into the drywall, cocoons. But it's just a mistake, you know.
Right. So how
That's
do you
why-
get it nominated?
Nominated for
The Treasury. For the
Treasury.
club.
All you got to do is say, I'll do it. Okay, you're nominated.
I second the nomination of Gail for treasurer.
There you go. Yes,
You're
when
gonna-
you
All in favor, say aye. Aye, there
Aye.
you go.
there you go. Nominate done.
You're gonna have to send me some schooling though.
No, not a problem. And that's what we did for I did it for Jeff. We've done it for a couple others. And within our club, I know Roger, I'm not sure if Roger does a whole lot of that. But I said, you know, if you want to take a class down at OSU, or you got something that, you know, you could help out the club and everything, the club will pay for it. You know, that's, and over time, and we've got 5,000 something on it in the till, you know, and it's because of other things. We get donations every year, things like that. This year, kind of null and void because, you know, there's nothing going on. You know, the Maple Syrup Fest in Williams County, they usually give us like $150 to come and put on our tables and stuff. And we just put it back in the club for education. We talked about Madeline, the education committee wants to do and give Madeline a nuke body and everything for her to make a split in the spring. So we're trying to do that. Chris is trying to really push hard on getting more money for scholarships so we can help other kids into it.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
I have no problem with that. None at
Just
all.
remember, you gotta bring it before the board.
Oh, we will, because we have to do elections. Yeah, and what I'm going to do is we're just going to take the nominations the day before. So right before the meeting, I'll put it on SurveyMonkey, and I'll put the link out for everybody, and then whoever runs. So to do it properly by Robert's Rules of Order,
Yep.
I run for president. Then underneath me, if no one else can test that, then there's a slot for write-in. So if
Mhm.
somebody wants to write somebody in, Adam and I talked to him the other day, and in fact, I'll talk to him this afternoon too, because I'm going to check a couple B yards. I'm stopping at Jen's in his place. He's going to run for vice president again, and then a write-in. So once those are tallied by the end of it, Adam will open it up. This is the votes. So you'll be fine.
Okay.
And we do have it written in there that you have to know QuickBooks or able-bodied to go out and get some training. And with you, Gail, what I can do is set you up with Pam, our bookkeeper for our 501c3s, to at least and help you go through that stuff. That to start out, let Pam take care of it. And
Mhm.
well, we still have to have, because the books right now are with Pam to make sure
Right.
that everything was done for Mary. So she can sign off and say, yes, there was nothing done. Everything's accurate, blah, blah, blah. And then once that's done, then I'll get you the password and stuff. So you can at least go into it, maybe come into the office and sit with Pam, and she can show you some of the things that are going on with it. It's an easy 501c3. You know, we're not incorporated and have all the other stuff to it.
Right.
And then, you know, you can even, because it's an open account on that, we can leave Pam, and it's up to the board. We can leave Pam in charge of it until you feel comfortable enough, and then we can pull Pam out and leave it to you. So
Okay.
depending how you want to play it.
I'm not trying to minimize it either, but quite frankly, I am a president of a couple different boards, 501c3s, based on the amount of money that we're talking about. And I don't know enough about Black Swamp, but my guess is there's not paid employees, which makes it a little more difficult. But I can't imagine this, Gail, is going to be, all kidding aside, I mean, I seconded the nomination. If you want to do it, I think that's great. I think you're good at it. But in terms of fear of doing it, I can't imagine that this is a complex accounting issue. QuickBooks is very easy. And I think, especially with Jamie saying there's somebody that can help, I think you'll find it to go fairly easy.
Yeah. Yeah. The only thing we have to report on is probably come up late October is our 501c3 because of our affiliate with Ohio State. So the affiliate with that is we have a year-end report, which that's what Pam's getting ready right now. And it has all our donations If
Yeah.
anybody donated to us more than $250, there's a separate form for that.
Right.
Our 990N is filled out by Ohio State,
Right.
and we have all the officers. If we change anything with the bylaws, that has to be updated. So it's just a
Yeah.
little packet. I think there's 6 or 7 pages,
Mhm.
and then we sign it at the end. Treasurer, I sign it because we have to have 2 names on each account. The treasurer signs it, and then the bank gives us a statement, and then we send it in, and they give us our insurance. So it's quick, it's easy. You know, the only time it kind of gets, and I'm not saying hectic, is when, like in February, February, when we get back together, everybody who ups again.
Mhm.
So the dues will be,
Right.
so we'll have the dues. And then other than that, just making sure, and then Nancy, not Travis, Nancy, oh, come on, Jimmy. Nancy Kraus. Nancy Kraus has the whole list of all the membership, and she's got it all laid out. All you gotta do is check the box. Yes, they paid, make the deposit, and it's all done. And everything's already tied together, so it's a no-brainer.
Okay. All right. Right back.
All right, ladies and gents, we'll get about 1 more minute. And this is probably the hardest decisions you have to make getting into your second year.
I just want to make sure I do everything I can possibly do. I understand nature takes its own course, and I appreciate that actually. But I want to make sure I do everything I can possibly do to give them the best shot to overwinter as well as possible. I would like to shoot. My goal is I don't know how you count, maybe by weight, maybe you can tell me that, but I would like to shoot for the like 65-75% range of survival. How do they measure that? Do you do the weight? Is it like a weight thing, or I mean, how do you know?
I mean, okay, of survival of,
Yeah, of bees. Like, how do I know if I have like 60,000 in November and 30,000 in March?
there's real not, I have never seen a scientific way to do that.
Oh, okay.
What you do, I mean, Connors is probably, he's got one of his books has a formula to it that you have to document it for like 3 months. When in the spring buildup, you're counting frames of cat brood.
Oh, okay.
And then what you do is he's got a formula in there. So if you look at a frame and let's say there's 10% on one side of the frame, on the other side there's 30. So you take all these percentages and put them together, and then in that 21-day rotation, so it's not a full 30 days, from the time you see that, you do 21-day rotations on your paperwork of how much cat brood do you see.
Okay.
So what they're estimating is on the buildup from that April, let's just say April, you can get into your bees. How much cat brood? So at the beginning, you might only see out of the whole brood chamber, you might see maybe barely 1 frame of cat brood. Okay, you get into 21 days later, you're in the middle of May. Now you check that cat brood again. Now you might be 6 frames of cat brood. So there's a whole formula in it of all the cat brood that you see. And what they do is they take the buildup. Either you can do that artificially through feeding or by natural, and just let the bees, go out and forage on their own. You're not stimulating, you're not doing anything. And how that builds up. There's a whole formula you lay out, and it tells you when your buildup is. The primary reason to do that is 6 weeks before the honey flow. So for us, it's just about the time everybody starts seeing dandelions. When we see dandelions, that's when the guys are tapping maple trees, and you get that ebb and flow. So you get that 40 plus or over freezing during the day and the freezing at night. That's when all the maple, the sap in the trees and the phloem layer, It's pushing up in the tree and it's coming back down. So they tap. When we start seeing dandelions is when all those guys, when the trees become budded, so the buds start to swell, they'll pull the taps because it actually taints or changes the taste of the maple syrup. And that's about when the fall or in that festival comes in for maple tapping. So when that happens for that, if you have your bees primed up to maximum potential when the honey flow kicks in, if you do an artificial swarm and pull the old queen away, Mel's book says your colony, if you have it maxed out to peak 6 weeks before, the honey flow kick or the nectar flow kicks in, you take the old queen, one frame of brood, and pull it away and make a split. By the time that next queen is emerged and laying, you'll have 180 to 250 pounds of honey, or excuse me, wet nectar on your colony. But that's also, but that is a second and third and fourth year beekeeper that has tons of drawn comb that everything, all you got to do is put it in and they just instantly fill it.
Right.
What screws with that, what honestly screws with that formula is a first year beekeeper or a beekeeper that doesn't have, so let's say I have all foundation. Now you have to convert it to 10 pounds of honey, make 1 pound of wax. And it just, I've never seen a formula that comes out perfect every time.
So when someone says, because that's what I've heard, when when a beekeeper says to another beekeeper, say, so what was your overwintering survival rate? And they say 65 or 70%. They're talking about a capped brood build?
No, okay, not that. When we talk the Bee Informed partnership, when we talk about that, what I do in our area is I put out a survey monkey. Okay, so it's a survey. Everybody in our area, so Rogers Club. I also do one for just our club because I want to see what our numbers are. So I put out, Roger usually kind of piggybacks. So there's two surveys. One says just BSBA only. And the other one, you can click on either link. And the other one says Northwest Ohio region or Maumee Valley, because I'm the director for that. When we take that, there's a bunch of questions. One will say, how many hives did you go into winter with?
Okay.
So for you, let's just say you have 3. What did you come out? And the surveys usually go out in April. What survived the winter time? So we take everybody's colonies. Let's just say last year, our individual club lost less than 12.12%. Ohio overall, our region area, that's all the way to the other side of Toledo by Sandusky and all the way down towards Van Wert. We lost over 40, I think it was 48 point something percent.
So what's the numerator and the denominator? That's what I'm questioning. What am I looking at to know the survival rate? How'd you get to the 12%?
Okay. So you take your denominator, and that's how many colonies got ready for winter. So that's everybody that went into winter with X amount of colonies.
Oh, I see.
And then you divide that by how many colonies survived.
Okay.
So
Okay.
you know that ratio coming back out. So
Okay.
when I go down in March, when we have the inspector meeting, we take all those numbers. Last year, there was 88, there was maybe 100 some odd inspectors. So we all sit in a room. They usually have 2 different days, or sometimes if you want to take the training, you could take both days. You go down and then she kind of calls on everybody, and everybody was there were some counties that got American foul brood. They were at 82% loss. So we went around the room. She goes, Jamie, she said, what's your region? And I said, my region is, we were at like 48 something percent. And I said, oh, let me throw in a caveat. I said, except Defiance County, we were at 12.12. And I mean, everybody in that Coliseum room about their jaw about dropped. And somebody goes, you honestly? And I said, honestly, I got the numbers. I have all the surveys, and I got everybody who filled out the survey. And I tell everybody, don't do it just to beef the numbers up. Honestly, put in there. If you lost 10 colonies and you only had 10, put it in there.
Right.
But overall, our club, and I'm saying one club is better than the other. The club in Northwest Ohio that I'm the vice president with Dwight, all older beekeepers. I'm like the youngest guy there at 50. There are some younger ones. I mean, a few kids that are kind of coming up through 4-H. you go to Maumee Valley with Roger, there's a median age. I mean, they got some young and old, so he's got it all over. Our club is all young, and honestly, our club is almost like family. We all talk, we all help each other out, and we're doing a lot of different things. So through education, the camaraderie, if you will, and everything, we got a better survival rate and everything else. So everybody's like, well, how are you doing it? I said, through education. I said, we got babysitters, which everybody kind of laughs at, but we do. This year was a little bit less than what we've had previous years, but COVID had a play in it, but we all help each other out.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at the overall numbers, yeah, we're doing way better than anybody else.
So it's hives, not bees. I always was under the impression they were talking about you started with 60,000 bees, and in March you ended up with 40,000 bees. It's not bees, it's hives.
No. It's colonies.
Okay.
Survivability.
All right.
The Bee Informed Partnership will put out numbers like that they'll do individual states, and then they do it across the US. Like 2 years ago, Bee Informed Partnership came out and said, because they take all these surveys across the United States, every state, it was 80%. And then all of a sudden, every newspaper in the world picked it up. Across the United States, we lost 80%. Doesn't mean everybody lost 80%.
Right.
It was the national average. What you're talking about, and you've probably heard, is their survivability of the buildup. So that's when they're looking at, I had 60,000 bees in my colony. It was up into the third box. And you're doing that. For me, like I said, I've never seen a good formula. So I always say, if I have 2 boxes and I got 14 frames of brood, either eggs, larvae, pupae, and capped, I roughly have 80,000 bees.
Right.
So you kind of calculate it down, 8,000 per frame if you're running deeps. So there's 8,000 per side, so 16,000 bees, and then you kind of calculate that out.
Mediums are what, 6,000?
Mediums are 6.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. All right, on to the second year. And I wanted to do this now. And I want you, for those of you on here, I want you to do some homework for me by the next meeting. Lay out a plan of what you're going to go into winter with. Because this year, everybody, this is all beekeepers together. When you start with a nuke, do not expect honey. If you start with a package, guaranteed you're probably not going to have honey. Your second year is when all these other doors are going to open up and all these other things are going to happen. There is no right or wrong about this. Nobody's going to get graded on an A, B, C, D, or F. It is what your goals are or what you kind of want to venture into to kind of open this up a little bit. If it's just to make your bees live, you just want to do pollination, you want to have fun with it, and just put it on there. But I want to kind of help and guide you a little bit of some handouts and some other things that if I can help you go into a direction, let's just say Gail wants to do tons and tons of cut comb, then we can push in that direction a little bit, or I can help push her in that direction and getting her that stuff. Because even if you attend every bee meeting for OSBA, BSBA, go to Rogers and everything else, there's not enough meetings to know what you're going to get into and get that information. So I want you to kind of do some forecasting for me. Again, and I'm just going to tease you. You tired of seeing this slide? Being prepared might count. And that's all I'm going to say. The 2017, this is across Defiance County only. Roger did his this year, and I'm going to publicize that. He wants to get permission from Barb before he gives me that information because it is somewhat proprietary with ODA. I have a new one for 220. Once I get the rest of the inspections done for Kevin Adkins, which is the commercial. Right now, I have a couple people in Hicksville. I have Tony Egley that just made a bunch of splits. I'm going to go back and check hers. I have Nay area for Andrew. And then I'm going to start going down through the rest over by Jewel and going down through Ayersville. So this whole next 2 weeks is going to be my evenings are going to be out getting stuff done. And then I'm going to come out with this chart and see if we're doing better. I wanted to do this every 2 years, but it just hasn't happened. This year, I'm going to get that done. So knowing who's your neighbor is, I can give you this map, and I'll give it. And if you guys want this map, I can give you this one. But this was 2017, where the apiaries are at. So the stick pin is the people. If you look at the green, that was class members. Who's around you? The commercial A, that was a commercial beekeeper A, commercial beekeeper D, and there's my commercial beekeeper F. This was in 2017 when we lost about 80% of our hives in Defiance County. And I can contribute every one of them to commercial beekeeper F. Everywhere that he had a pin within a 2.5 mile area, he infected each person, and everybody there lost over at least minimum 50%, if not more, of their colonies. He had them so spread out that it infected everybody else around. In 2018, he lost 800 colonies, and he got out of beekeeping, and he's in Paulding area. And all of a sudden, our whole map in 2018 flourished like crazy because of education. You know, you take one major beekeeper out of the equation, and then things completely changed. So I went around, and what I done is I took a map of 2.5 miles around each one of them pins, and you can see how people are overlapped. So this does a couple different things. It tells you where the forage is at. So if you kind of look past or kind of squint a little bit and you look past all the circles, where's most of the forage? It's not out here between Mark Center and Hicksville a little bit. It's all crops. But what's in between that? The wooded areas, the creeks that are flowing. In Defiance, right along the rivers. The farmers can't get right up to the river. So where do you want to put your colonies? Out here in the middle of cropland where you don't see many circles? And if you notice where the circles are at, that's where the nectar flow is running. You got rivers running around. You coming off the Maumee and the All Glaze. Hicksville got a lot of areas around here where it's kind of preserved, or the farmers have left enough forage area that's good for bees. So where do you want to take your colonies or make it some out yards? Follow where those crop areas are at. Talk to the farmers. There's no list out there. I've tried to get it, but USDA will not give it out. If you know farmers well enough, or just make a cold call, pull up to a farmer's house and say, you know, I'm a beekeeper. Is there anybody around planting clover or putting in buckwheat or putting in alfalfa or leaving it for Mother Nature or CRP land where I could put some bees where it would benefit? A colony of bees requires 50,000 acres. So when people say, how many beehives can I put in an area? You need tons and tons of forage, just not for a month, but from that whole time, from that April all the way to that October. So when you're driving around all season long, look and see if you see just tons and tons of wildflowers out in somebody's acreage. You know, look at you can get online, go to the Defiance map. Every county has it. You can see a plot map, who owns it, make some phone calls and say, hey, you know, can I set up an out yard? The nice thing about this also on this map, I can see who's overlapping my area for not just forage, but diseases. Do I have, you know, here's my main yard. Look at the white circle of commercial beekeeper F here. Here's one, he's overlapped me here. He's overlapped my queen rearing yard, and he's overlapped me in the south. That's the year in 2017 when Barb Letcher came up. Every time I would have a mite counter 2 or 3, the next month it would be up to 18, 20, and 30. And I would treat again. I treated almost 5 times that year. He disappears. I had a bumper crop of queens, a bumper crop. I think I sold 80 nukes that year in 18. So there's the difference between this. There's a semi-commercial guy in Hicksville that now all these red circles have completely diminished. I think he's down to one or 2 rings now. So doing that little bit of stuff on Google Earth really helps things out. Brown's up this way. He's got a couple yards, so you can see how things change year to year. Your second year, what's the worst thing you can have in your first year? Frames a foundation. Remember, if you were still on while Gail and I were talking, your drone comb that you have extracted, if you took some honey this year, is the most valuable thing to a beekeeper. If all the cells are all drawn out, that's like moving into a condominium in a hotel that's completely furnished. Everything's there. All the cells are drawn out. The queen can instantly go in, do her thing, and build up a colony twice as fast than it is with somebody with a frame of foundation, where the bees have got to have a nectar flow. They have to have nurse bees to secrete wax. 10 pounds of honey to make 1 pound of wax. Keeping healthy wet brood, the Varroa destructor, the hive beetle, the wax moth, and you guys jumped in at the perfect time to have a good season. Overall, we did have a very good season. Last year's class, I think 90% of them lost all their hives because it was wet, cold, and rainy all the way up till June. We had a full-on dearth, and then on top of that, we had an early winter. So you guys jumped in at just the right time. I wish I could have had a crystal ball and say, yes, this colony, or yes, next year's going to be better yet. Dwight Wilson and the old beekeepers always have made the comment that you always have a good year followed by a testing year that's going to test you. So there's some things to think about. For most of you on here, your golden goal is off here to the right. That nice, beautiful frame of capped honey. And that's what we all want. Except people who raise queens. I would love to have a frame like that with all capped brood. So remember some of the things that you've done this year. You know how to evaluate a queen and look for brood. That second frame, what's a good brood pattern? Your formation type, and there is no right or wrong on this. You know, when I was young and dumb and I got into this, I wanted all deeps all the way up. Jamie ain't doing deeps no more. In fact, I'm kind of contemplating about buying 165 shallows from Dwight Wilson that's only 6 inch or 5 3/4 tall, but the box of 8 frame equipment, if even full of honey, is only going to be about 40 pounds. Compare that to a deep of honey of 100+ pounds. So I don't want to wreck my backup. If you're young and you're still vibrant, go for the deeps. Do what you need to, but understand, and there's no shame into downsizing a little bit. Remember, going into wintertime, we're looking at that open entrance on the top, that open entrance on the bottom. And if you desire, and I'm not saying pro feed during the wintertime, but it is an insurance policy on top of the colony. It does take money to do it, but if I have an entire colony that's full of capped honey, I have some in the freezer, I'm not going to worry about the sugar water. I'm not going to worry about the 2-to-1. I'm not going to worry about putting it in dry. I'm not going to worry about winter patties, because honey is acidic. You can take a thing of honey and pour it onto a counter. It'll never grow mold. They use it for wound care. If you have a cut, put honey on half of it. If it's a long enough cut, put honey on half of it, Neosporin on the other. And I will promise you I've done it over, especially on my legs that get cut up. I walked behind my Envoy once and hit the hitch on the back, and it put a cut on my leg about 4.5 inches long. And I put honey on half of it Neosporin. The honey one healed up, completely closed, and less of a scar than the other half of it. So honey it has tons of micronutrients, everything else. If you don't have tons of honey and you don't have it in the freezer and ready to go, that sugar block and things on top, that winter patty, that is insurance that they can eat some junk food along with the good food down below with the honey and still make it through winter. If you have a colony that does not have enough honey and you look at it and go, nope, it's not enough, you cannot get a colony. And I've done it over and over, taking bees to Tennessee. You cannot get bees through winter with just throwing all the junk food at them. It's alkaline. 2-to-1 water will grow mold. 1-to-1 will grow mold. Take a 1-to-1 sugar water, zip it up, put it off to the side, and you'll see black fungus that grows all over it. If you want to go with me on that county inspections in the springtime, I can tell you 100% every time the people that feed tons and tons and tons, so they strip all the honey off and they feed tons and tons of 2-to-1 or 1-to-1 sugar water, in the spring, all their frames have that gray and black mold all over them. because that's excess moisture. It's alkaline. It grows mold. So you see problems. So I'm not pro saying that throw tons of junk food at them, but if you need it, it's there. Being prepared. The possibilities are overwhelming with getting your colonies through winter time, because over winter time we got the absolute fall off. So October, November, December, everything's shutting down. If you have a young queen that was mated late in the season, she will even lay brood through this whole winter time. In the spring, that thing's going to build up in February, March, April. You're going to have bumper crop. You're going to have a split. You're going to have tons and tons of bees. So there's tons of things that you can do with it, and we'll talk about a few of them. Apiary increases. So I'm going to do, let's just say this overwintered hive off here to the left. There's my colony in the springtime. It's going like gangbusters. Every colony that you own that gets through wintertime will want to propagate. And when I say propagate, the old queen, the colony itself, if you read Tom Seeley's book, Bee Democracy, the queen does make 99% of the decisions, but the colony also makes a decision, and it's called super sisters, that will make the decision that the colony is filled to the rim. We're over that 80, 90%. All the brood is filled, or we've backfilled the area in the brood laying so that the queen, usually where she's laying eggs, is all backfilled with nectar. We're going to put the queen on a 3-day diet, and we're going to turn around, jump out the front door, and get her to swarm with us. So what you do in the springtime, you take that old queen away. If it's still cold and a little bit wet and damp in the springtime, if it's nice and sunny and let's say we're getting into that midsummer kind of temperatures and it's not freezing at night, you could turn on and do this with 1 frame of brood. But if it's early spring and we still got some cold and temperatures back and forth, then I would have 3 frames of brood. More brood in that box, the better, but don't jam it all up with brood, because remember, in the original colony, now you've broken the brood cycle. Now your varroa is going to drop back to that 98% kill because they're going to consume each other. And there's no other brood to turn on and propagate, so they're going to crash. If you take tons of brood over to colony B with your old queen, you're also taking the varroa load with that old queen. So take enough to support her. Maybe 2 frames of brood is good. You look at the forecast, things are climbing up. Winter's about done. You could do it with 2 frames of brood. If it's late in the season and we're already into summer, you could take 1 frame of brood. If it's early, take 3 frames of brood. But a frame of pollen or a frame of honey, at least a frame of honey, you can always supplement the pollen on the top by putting in a little bit of pollen patty, not winter, pollen patty. And then you could use Mega Bee at a 38 or 36 to 38% pollen, and they'll build up even faster yet. And then if all else, you can put another box on top of that and do a 5/5, and she'll crank right out. This original colony, from the time you take the queen away, if this is maximum and the nectar flow starts, you can crank on an extra 100+ pounds of nectar. So you're just going to put box after box after box and stay ahead of the bees. Don't ever let them get to that 80, 90% and start to backfill. Make sure you're a good beekeeper and staying ahead of the bees and giving them room. So not only can you do that once, what if you get inside, they already, let's say colony A started to already set up and you see some queen cells. Again, take the queen cell, put that in the center, surround it with brood, frame of pollen or sub on the top, a frame of honey. If you don't have a lot of honey, put on a 1-to-1 feeder on the top. So now I can break it into 2. What if in the springtime you have somebody nearby, or you want to try to change up your genetics a little bit? Purchase a queen, either mated or a virgin. Remember, your mated queens, that means the queen person took all the risk from the cell to grafting to everything to mating flight. She came back, started laying 2 frames of brood. That's why those queens cost $35 to $40 or more. I just heard the other day when we were on this queen call, Sue Colby, if you want genetics, artificial or instrumental insemination, Sue Colby has queens from German drones with such and such A&I, blah, blah, blah. They're $1,800 a piece for each queen. Plus you have to pay $200 insurance to have it overnighted to your house. So if you have some money to burn, you can buy a $2,000 queen and Turon start another queen. But for most of us, just joking aside, you can purchase a queen and maybe in the middle of the season, you found another queen cell. But please remember, if you're going to chase numbers, every colony here, there's another nuke, so another $35. You have to have enough frames of brood that you're stealing from the parent colony. You have to have frames of pollen or nectar, so you got to steal from here or feed them. So you could take one colony and make 4 splits. Now you're doing the numbers thing. This colony, if you strip this colony, colony A, and you stripped it down that far, you're probably not going to get any honey that year. So just remember, if you go stripping it all the way down, and you could completely do away with hive A and make them all into splits. And that's your choice. So there is no right or wrong about it. In the springtime, easiest way to do it is just to do a dirty split. If you're not good at finding the queen, you're not able to do things, make sure that there's eggs. So here's my colony in the springtime. I still have honey over top. Everything's looking good. I take the colony, either if it's in one box, if they're in 2 boxes like this is the best way to do a split because you have eggs up and down. So I'm just going to get another bottom board, put it over here off to the purple, split the colony in half, or take frames of eggs and make sure there's eggs in the box A and box B. The frame that has the queen in it is just going to raise themselves and keep on laying. Nothing. She thinks they automatically split. Something happened. She's going to build back up, so they automatically split. The frame that has the eggs in it, you're going to start seeing the queen cells starting to be pulled out. So that's just the easiest way. You're not doing anything. You're just splitting the colony in half, or take the frames and actually hand making that split. You don't have to find the queen. You can just do this kind of split. It's an easy way to do it. So now your apiary is going to go from 4 hives to 8 hives. Not every split will work because that queen has got to turn on and pull out as a queen cell. She's got to emerge. She's got to turn on and go out and make a mating flight, which that's about 10% of the kill because birds pick them off. They never come back. Then she's got to lay. She's got to make a good mating flight, and then she's got to come back. And that runs a risk. The nice thing about this is if hive B, where this virgin queen came back and she doesn't perform, you can just take the colonies, put newspaper between them, combine them back together. You still have 1 hive. Meldicicone, OTS. It's called on-the-spot queen rearing. This is where you take your hive tool and a frame of eggs, and it's called notching. So you take the hive tool, you shove it down. You do not bump these eggs in the row. So coming up here, I take a frame, I take the old queen away, make a split. I take a frame of eggs, I take my hive tool, and I crush that 1/3 of the bottom of the cell with eggs or brand new larvae. That means the egg has turned to the side, and I have a brand new larvae cell that's starting. If I crush this down along this line, all of a sudden I got 3 queen cells started here, 2 here, 1 there. The best thing to do is to do it on wax foundation. And the reason is when I make the splits, if I have 3 cells that are right here, I can take a utility knife and cut those 3 cells out and put those 3 queens in with another split. If I have these 2 right here, I can cut that out and do that with another split. And it's a way to make 1 hive. You've already made 1 split with the old queen, and you could split it into 9 different colonies. So it's a way to jump numbers up even faster yet. But he has a good book. I think the price of the book, if you order it online, is like $80 or $85. But he's got tons of science behind it. Next year, I think this year for the fall conference, or for our conference for BSBA, we're going to try to get Mel to come down and show us in the apiary how to do this. So it's a good way to do it. You keep breaking the brood cycle. If you go to OTS on Facebook, there's actually an entire group of people that talk about OTS. I think his name is Jason, who runs the group, and that's all they do. They talk about OTS and how to do splits and how to do things. This, you're not really doing anything other than making the split and doing the notch. The bees are raising themselves. They're feeding them. They're doing everything. This is a minimum thing for maximum output. So you're taking one colony and you're splitting it at least 4 to 5 times, if not more. And in his book, the nice thing about his book is he has just a one split where you do one split and how much of the excess nectar you're going to have in the buildup, all the benefits, the pros and cons. Then in the next one, he splits it 2 times, all the pros and cons. He splits it 6 times, all the pros and cons. And he kind of spells everything out for you. On to the next. What can you do with an overwintered colony? Take a queen rearing class where we actually talk about grafting. And this is where you're actually taking a German tool. It looks like a orthodontist pick tool that they clean your teeth with or scrape your teeth. We run these every year. We did not run one this year because of COVID, but we always run 2 or 3 in the upper right. I taught that class at Northwest Ohio for their club. Lower below that, I'm trying to teach my granddaughter, even though all she does is put her fingers in the frames of honey. We went up to Toledo area with Rogers Club between the top one and the bottom right. And then I went with Dwight Wells. We taught in advance, and it's usually a 2-day class, and we teach you all the different styles. The different ways to do this. You can do cell punch, and it's a way to do it with with raw wax foundation. The Miller method, we teach you that, where you actually take a frame of eggs, you take a knife and you cut V's and cut slots into it, and everywhere the little V hangs has all that have all the cells, and you just cut them all apart. And Doolittle is probably the most famous because you can take a frame of eggs that as soon as the egg starts to lay down and emerge, you're going to graft that out. Women, I'm just going to be honest here, women make the best grafters. Women who do needlepoint and really fine hand motor movements like needlepoint, sewing, things like that are the absolute best grafters in the world because they're used to seeing what they're doing or the needlepoint type thing. I've seen women that I've taught that when I went down to Pennsylvania is probably the best. I gave everybody a frame of brood. I put all the bars in front, put the grafting stations up, said, go. This woman who does needlepoint, she does it and she'll put your name in little pillows and all kinds. I don't understand the whole thing of it. And she goes, I'm done. And I just laughed. Honestly, I just laughed at her. And I said, there's no way. Looked over. She perfectly grafted 10 cells within like 3 minutes because they have that eye hand motor movement. So, and then this with Doolittle, you can turn on and like you see the upper picture, here's about 32 queens that are I can graft. Down below, I think that's 20, I think it's 21. I can put 22 or 23 if I squeeze the California cages. So that's how many queens you can have in one shot. If you have the operation, but remember, go ahead, John.
I'm just going to ask because I think I've said this before a couple times to you. I'm interested in this next year, the queen rearing piece.
Yep.
So do you, when you go to graft these from the larva, well, first question is there certain stages of larva that you want to graft? In other words, like the first, second, third, fourth day. And if so, how do you know that? Is it just the size of the larva?
You either bifocals, trifocals, magnifying glass. I want it that cell. If I'm going to do Doolittle, I want that egg when it dropped and it just ate the cocoon and it has that little bit of royal jelly underneath her.
Oh, okay.
So she's floating in that little tiny pool. Because if she's eating that royal jelly, if it turns into a worker after the 3rd day, they're all fed royal jelly for 3 days.
Right.
Workers, queens, and drones. After the 3rd day, workers are starting to be fed bee bread. So if I have an older larvae that starts to get that fat C, and I graft that one, you'll see, and to me, the best way I can say it is a mutant. It'll have the body of a worker, but her abdomen will come out and she'll lay. But she lays this screwed up pattern because her genetics, because remember, the only two differences between a worker and a queen, that's still a fertilized egg, but one was fed royal jelly the entire time and turned on certain traits. And if she's fed royal jelly all the time, or bee bread, she turns into a worker. Royal jelly the entire time turns into a queen. So if you kind of cut that and she's fed bee bread and stuff, and you try to convert it back into a queen, you just screwed everything up. So it takes good eye-hand coordination, and you have to be able, black foundation, absolute best, hands down. But you could turn around and do this. You don't have to do 45 at a time. You could do 4. You could do 3. You could actually raise 2 every 2 weeks. You could just raise 2 queens and then start selling some virgin queens. If you're going to do this kind of grafting, just remember, you have to have more nukes, more frames, more time, more resources, more out yards. There's a lot of the things that go with it. But when you try and get up to that, the first time I ever grafted, I grafted 45 and I had 2 queens. And I thought, oh my God, I'm happy. But now I can shoot for like 90 some odd %. If I do 45, I can do easily 40 plus.
So can you keep these?
But the amount of,
I'm sorry. Can you keep these?
Nope.
You said the queen yard. Can you keep these in a queen yard within like 100 feet of your other apiary, or no?
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
okay.
And then I can bank these. It's called banking. So after all these queens emerge, I can have them here in the bottom bar, and I can keep them up to 21 days before their QMP, and then it starts to go down, and then they're not viable to go out and take mating flights. So I can bank them like this and turn around and just sell them all day long. Or if I get an excessive amount, which I didn't this year because I didn't do so much, I can turn around and just give them away. So it's just some things you can do. The other thing on top of this, maybe not a second year, but maybe second, having the interest into it and starting to read some books, is instrumental insemination. That's when you take a virgin queen, when she's susceptible to turn on to get a mating flight in, so that's 7 to 10 days. When she sexually matures, you go out and find a good yard that has a good performing colony. Let's just say Gales. We know she has good genetics in the area. You want to ask the person, do you have hot bees? How much honey did they pull in? Did you have any problem with chalk brood or problems with that? Was your nosema count under? So did they turn around and really do that? If they did, those are the kind of drones you want to collect. Then you get underneath the microscope, you squeeze the drones, you collect the semen, you instrumental inseminate the virgin queen. You do. There's a lot of process to this, but then that queen is worth $250 plus. But you're training your bees to have certain genetics, and then if you're just going after honey, that's a good trait. There's some people that want tons of bees just for propolis. That bees that go out and collect tons of propolis than it is with honey. There's other bees that you want for gentleness. So you want to cross Italians with Carnolians. I want a gentle bee. I don't want to, like for me, I could graft and have tons of Russian bees, but I will promise you that not one person, they might buy a nuke from me the first year. They won't buy a nuke from me the next year because Russian bees will eat you alive. Very aggressive, put in tons of honey, but not a first-year beekeeper type bees. Because you guys wouldn't want to go out to your apiary if every time you got to put in a snowmobile suit and go out and fight your bees, you wouldn't be a beekeeper too long. And that's some other things you can get into.
So basically the instrumental insemination sounds like a better route than just a route of see what happens when your queen takes her flight to the DCA. Is that so? You get more control over the genetics with the instrumental insemination than just boy, I hope she makes it, first of all. Second, if she makes it back, I hope she mated with 15 to 20, and I hope who she mated with had good genetics. Is that an accurate summary?
Yep. It's very accurate, but when you get into the inseminating stand, and by the time you get the CO2 system, the microscope and everything, you got about $5-6 grand into it.
Okay.
So if you really wanted to control it, the only other step in between that is actually having, like my yard, at my house, I have the queen rearing yard. And then a mile out, 3/4 to a mile out, all around me, I control those genetics. So you do it by flooding the genetics in your area.
Yeah.
And other than that, the only other thing to do is to do instrumental insemination. But by the time you do this, that's why Sue Colby, when she does this, I mean, she flies to Germany and collects plasm, or which is male semen, and she flies back. That's why her queens are $2,000 a pop.
Does she guarantee that then?
So when you,
Because if I'm gonna give her $2K,
oh no,
no, baloney.
no.
I'm not giving
No.
her $2K and have the queen.
She
in 3 days.
guarantees it, because you got to pay $1,600 to $1,800 depending on the line. But she's out in Washington where she controls the genetics. She's up against the
Right.
ocean. There's no other bees around, so she controls it. Plus she does all this I&I. And I&I, you get $1,600 to $1,800 for the queen. And then it's like $250 or $300 for the insurance that it shows up at your doorstep alive.
Mm.
And after that, if you accidentally messed it up and the queen dies, it's completely on you.
Yeah.
And there are people that buy them. Your second year, you could sell nukes. And this is viable for every one of you because you're going to have an overwintered nuke. But please remember, on your inspection form, you're going to fill that out with the address, just like you did this year, property owner. So if you have it yourself or not, and you're just going to circle yes, that you're selling nukes. And this gets the apiary inspector to your property a little bit quicker, because we have to have them all inspected by June 1st to run and make sure that you don't have a European foul brood, you don't have American foul brood, chalk brood problems, or something else in between. So all you're going to do is circle yes, you send it in. It doesn't cost any more, any less. It's still $5 per apiary. And remember, apiary location is if you have them at your house and you have them at the other end of your property, still one apiary. If you have it at your house and then you have it down at your grandfather's or some other out yard a couple miles away, you got 2 apiaries. So that's the ODA. Next year, every colony that overwinters and you only make one split from it, you're going to have excess up to 200 plus pounds of honey for that box alone. Remember, the beekeeper has a lot to do with how many pounds of honey. What if you were a beekeeper that only had, let's just say the pink semi, whatever color that my wife picked out, I only put on 2 boxes. Life got too busy and I forgot to put other boxes on top during the honey flow. The bees won't pack in that extra 200 pounds of honey. That means they're going to fill this up, swarm 2 or 3 times. Nothing's going to happen. And when I say the maximum honey flow, that's you doing the right things, keeping your mites under control, health of the colony, adding in boxes correctly. Your problem next year could be this off to the right. Making your own market is what you want people to look at your stuff and go, yep, I know that's Gail stuff. If you guys all know Carlin with the CH, you can go to Jacob's Meat and Defiance. He's got 5 or 6 places in town. He's got almost all the Stryker and Bryan covered area. He's on Etsy, the whole 9 yards. But when you see his logo, you know that he's got a certain brand of jars, a certain brand and style of logo, really colorful logos, and that's his niche. And people look for that niche because it doesn't matter. I wish we had had club meetings because we usually have a honey tasting contest. Every beekeeper is allowed to bring in their honey. We ask you to put it in a jar without your label on it. We give everybody, we got a bucket or this little box from Gordon's, all these little spoons. You pick up 10 or 15 spoons and you taste everybody's honey. 9 out of 10 times, Carlin never wins that because other people do, because they might have put cinnamon with it or done something different. But in the open market, when people see his logo, they instantly go, that's the best honey. Why? Because they've had a consistent product. It tastes a certain way. And he has that frou-frou branding, and his wife puts little ribbons and stuff on it. So they instantly know that it's his stuff. So either you can turn around and go with the vermouth with the let's say the cork. Then you take that and you dip it into hot wax so it creates a seal over the cork. Now you have your own different style. The labels you guys have seen in Man Lake, Better Bee, Brushy Mountain, and all the other stuff. Come up with your own logo. Have your apiary name anything you want. For mine, it's my granddaughter's name, Katie's Bees and Honey. It could be Jen's Bees. It could be something that you and your husband put together and you created your own little kind of farmer market type thing. Don't copy anybody else. Make it your own, that when you start getting a customer base, they know that it's dependable, that and sell yourself along with it. You know, I keep my bees. Put pictures of you in the bee yard. And if you guys have seen Carlin, he takes pictures with his kid, which is, I call it child labor laws, because he always puts his kid holding a jar of honey and puts him in a bee suit, but he's got a niche. You know, he puts pictures of him going out and pulling honey boxes out of the apiary and does little videos, and he's got a huge market for it. And it's just marketing yourself. Honey itself, start doing a little research on all the different things that it does. I mean, there's a book, I think it's 1001 Ways to Turn on and Do Things with Honey. You know, wound care, infection, skin products, facial scrubs, cough suppressant. If you know anybody that does that, I do it myself. A spoonful of honey with a little cinnamon, and it'll knock out a cough pretty quick. A dietary supplement, a sleep aid. There's tons of research behind it that people that have restless leg syndrome, yeah, I said it correctly, that a couple spoonfuls of honey before night, it settles their legs down. You can cook with it. You know, there's a cookbook and all kinds of other things out there. Understand that it does a lot of different stuff, and you can kind of promote that. The only thing I'm going to say that do not put in there, and there are, I'm just going to say extremists at this point, don't put on your labels or in your flyers and things that it cures cancer or that it does this, because then you'll have the FDA and the other people all after you that, you know, it does not. And there's all kinds of restrictions with that. You can suggest that if you had, like for me, I don't tell people that it cured my allergies, but the reason I got into beekeeping was I had hay fever so bad from second grade till about 32 that I never went out in August. I never went out during the pollen flow. I never went to county fairs. I never went out to barns or anything out in the thing. 5 years of beekeeping, I can go out in anything. And it's because I consume my own honey. Is there research behind it? No. Will it work for everybody? No. But there are cases, and you can explain that to people, that, you know, you can eat pollen. You can do a whole marketing behind pollen and stuff. You know, there's tons of good science between hair treatments, facial scrubs and masks. There's all kinds of science for that. And if you have any of those things that you're going to advertise, put that documentation that there was research or the website of that research so people know it just wasn't your word for it, but there's other things behind it. So just watch on that. But you could turn on to all the other stuff, and then there's even more than that. Infused honey, dried herbs. Do not take herbs that are wet, like you pop them out of the garden and put it in, because they have a content of moisture. So if you take, let's say, rosemary, and you go out to your garden, you cut all the rosemary up and you throw it in a bucket. And what if that bucket was at 17% moisture, and now you put in a wet weed / rosemary, and it fermented up enough and it started to ferment? Then you got yourself in trouble. If you sold it to somebody and they get sick from it because it started to grow mold or started to ferment, then you're liable. So anytime you use dried herbs, Carlin, I'm going to refer back to Carlin again. He's got one. It's called Triple Hot. It's got jalapeno, some other pepper, and some other pepper to it. To me, he just ruined a 5-gallon bucket of honey. When my wife and I go to eat, I get honey barbecue, and she orders the other hottest blazing thing that she can get. When the waitress comes or the waiter comes, where's he always put the hottest stuff? Well, sir, here's your hot stuff. I'm like, no, I'm the wussy. I'm the baby. Give it to my wife. I don't like it. So when Carlin made that, I took a spoonful of it, and I just about hit the roof. But there's people, and he's got a gigantic market for it. So you could put all these different dried herbs, lavender. I mean, the market is, and what you do is you do it to your taste. So you take a pint jar, a 1 gallon jar that you can seal up tight, put in all your dried herbs. And what you do is you take that container and flip it upside down. You let it sit for another couple of weeks, flip it upside down, and you're trying to get those herbs mixed through it. The same way with orange peels, peppers, lemons, flavoring. Flavoring, it's not considered raw, real honey at that point because you're putting in an artificial flavor. But when you go out and see the honey straws that people market out, there's root beer, there's cherry, they got probably 75 different types of flavors. And you're doing the same thing. It's kind of a test and trial where you're going to take a little bit of honey, add it. So you're going to weigh your honey first. And let's say you have 3 ounces of honey and you put in a drop. It gives you a little bit of flavor, but not enough. Then you put 2 drops. Then you can do the science behind it. For those of you that are chefs and cooks, then you can say, okay, I got a pound of honey. How much honey do I need to how many drops of flavoring? Or you can do it with the all natural stuff. But
Kenny, two quick questions.
yes, sir.
One, does do you leave those dried herbs in there, or do you take them out before you sell it?
I have seen it both ways.
Okay.
I've seen it both.
Okay.
If it's the homestead thing, and it all falls under the cottage laws, so there's nothing, you don't have to label this differently because it has dried herbs.
Okay.
If you have more than 2 different compounds, that's when you have to turn on and have the label laws, and you've got to have ingredients as per what it is. So the first ingredient would be honey, because that's like 90%. And then you'd have to put rosemary or orange peel. The homesteaders tend to leave the herbs in. If it's marketable stuff like Carlin, he takes all that stuff out. So they actually strain it. He probably puts it in a sieve or one of the strainers, strains it out, puts it all into whatever containers he has, and then markets it that way.
So the key is to how long you leave it in, like a couple
Yep.
days, or?
These are probably, for the most part, I think 20 plus days.
Oh, really?
I've seen Bee Apothecary. It's Jeannie Som.
Yeah.
Bee Apothecary. So it's BEE apothecary.com. She leaves them in minimum of 6 months.
Wow.
And she says the longer it ages with the rosemary or whatever she has, the better the taste. It kind of smooths it out.
Wow.
So it depends what you have time for and what you have a market for.
The second question is, you mentioned that it helped your allergies by eating honey. How sure are you of that as much as also getting stung? Did getting stung also help, you think, or?
And that's John, and that's my proverbial, I have no idea.
Right.
Because about the time, my first year, I never noticed anything. My second year got better, but Dwight and I always like to hike together. We were hiking in fields of ragweed, and as he was walking, like when you walk through, he's walking and the ragweed's going, past his shoulders, kind of flipping back to me. It's in the air, and I'm smelling it, and all of a sudden I'm getting a little bit of a headache. My nose is running, and I told Dwight, I said, I got to stop. And I said, if I go through this field and all of a sudden I drop at the other side, are you going to pick up a 300-pound guy and carry him back? And he goes, no. I said, I'm headed home. Went home, took Allegra D, took a Flonase shot. Boom, I was fine the next morning. My third year, I noticed I got into late August and I still wasn't taking anything. But that's also when I started doing queen rearing. So I was getting zapped in the hands. I was getting zapped in the legs. I got up to about 100 and some odd colonies, and I started eating my own pollen. So I can't say this is what helped it. I think it was a combination of, but there's some people that swear up and down that all they do is eat the honey and it's done. I've heard other people say that they take their pollen, put it in the freezer. So if you're going to eat pollen, always keep it in the freezer. And then they break it up a little bit, put it a spoonful, put it across their Rice Krispies like I do, and then eat it that way. So I've never seen solid science on it. Jeannie Som says it's a myth, but I've seen some really good research on it that it says it does help. And for me, my own story, no matter how old I get, if I'm 90, if I make my golden, I hope I make it to 100 years old. I will always have bees for my own honey. Even if I have one colony, I want my own pollen, my own honey. Your second year, cut comb. Very, 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 you want to put some money in your pocket, and you have the older generation of adults that went through the depression, that went through and understand, because cut comb back in the day was the only sweetener that was out there. You could not buy sugar because they were using it for gunpowder and production. Honeybee or beekeepers back then they had an exemption or a ticket, and I can't remember what the tickets were called, but they could go to the market, and with that ticket, they could buy bags of sugar to feed their bees. Cut comb was a family caveat of having something sweet in the house. They would take a chunk of cut comb, put it on the dining room table, and that was their sweetener for their tea, their coffees, their dinner. I mean, the kids' treat. If you've ever eaten cut comb, you cut it, you just take a bite of it. If you have burr comb, take a bite of it. The honey explodes in your mouth, and it is just an extravagant type taste. When you use it for cut comb in the springtime, you're going to do that first split. You're going to feed this colony up on pollen about 2 weeks before and just get them built to the max. If you catch a swarm, even better yet, take the queen out of the swarm, take the entire swarm, stick them in this box, put a queen excluder above everything, put a cut comb box at the top, usually a medium. You can do it with deeps, but it takes a lot more bees and a lot more time. So a medium or a shallow on the top, telescoping or inner cover and telescoping top. When you set your foundation up, this is called thin set, and there's actually a certain foundation for it, and it's micro thin. So what you're going to do is you're going to frame it up, and then you're going to leave the bottom so it swings back and forth. You're not going to attach it to the bottom. You could even cut this directly in half, and what's going to happen, make sure your colony is completely level with the ground. When you set these up, you're going to turn around, put warm wax in the top of this. You're going to set the foundation in and pour a little bit more wax. Set this in the box so they're all pointed downward. When the bees pull this out, they're going to do these little teardrops. When they do the teardrops, that bottom edge will come close to the bottom, and then the bees will attach it. That's what makes the bottom frame completely straight. If you use foundation that goes from top to bottom, by the time they get this and warm it up, you'll have cut comb that'll come down and then it'll slump at the end. If you have a perfect frame like this in the bottom right, you could take that to a fair, and if it looks like this, you could win first place in a gold ribbon. So in this cut comb, and then you're going to take dental floss or a hot knife, and you're going to cut this out. Each section, as long as it's roughly about a 4x4, 5x5, you can get $12 per section, if not more. So what you're going to do then is you're going to put the frame out. You can take dental floss, or what I do is take bread knives, a sharp bread knife. I put it in a little coffee mug warmer. So it's like a hot simmer. Take 3 knives, put each one in. Pull it out of the hot water, take a rag, wipe it off, take that hot knife and make one cut. And that hot knife will melt the wax. It'll slice right through it on wax paper. And then you have each cassette or each square. And then put that knife back in the hot water, take the next knife and just make cut after cut after cut. Put them on you can pick those little bakery racks up. Let it drip out, because you want all that excess where you cut through them cells. You want all that excess honey to drip out. It takes about 2 days. After it's dry, then you're going to find what you want to cassette it into. Let me back up 1 second. Find the type of cassette you want first so you know what you're going to cut it into because of this. If you go to Kroger's or Chief or anybody that has the little sandwich boxes, then you'll know what size you're going to need. If you want to use like Man Lake, Better Bee, or any of them, these are like $2.50 a cassette, which I think is outrageous for plastic, but it's actually 4 1/4 by 4 1/4. So now you're going to know what you're cutting to what cassette you want. Katie's Bees and Honey, we use it this way. That's a 4x6 chunk. At the winery, when I sold them for $22 a chunk and would sell them all day long. Why? Because it's at a winery. If I sold these anywhere else, I can get about $12 per cut. And that is way more than what you can get into liquid honey. But you're cutting them out. That little cassette, you're going to take them then and put them in a freezer for 24 hours in case that there's a larvae or some eggs of a hive beetle or wax moth. Freeze them for 24 hours, pull them out, label them, and then I leave all the stickers empty because depending who bought it. If it was going to the winery, I'd write in 22. If I knew it was going to the farmer's market with D, we'd put 10 or 12. So that's an easy way to make a boatload of money. But at the same sense, it takes a boatload of bees and a boatload of resources to make. But it's another option. The nice thing about that is all those pieces that were left over that really didn't look perfect, they were kind of slumpy or anything else, take a mason jar, a wide mouth is preferred, slide a chunk of it in, put liquid honey over the top, and now you have chunk honey. And a jar of this in a quart size could go for $30. So you're not wasting any part of the cut comb. Even though if you go to judging, that cut comb must be from the top lip and touch to the bottom. If you're just putting in chunks like this, they don't want air bubbles and everything else. That's judging it. You're like your county fair, the state fair, EAS, Indiana bee conference, Ohio State bee conference. But you could put this in jars. People are absolutely fascinated. You could set up a garage sale, have all these little chunks off to the side. People will pick up the jar, and they're absolutely fascinated that the bees built comb inside of a jar.
I'm sorry, Jamie, did you say that you use the plastic foundation for the cut comb?
No, nope. It's called Thin Set. It's real wax foundation.
Thin set?
Yep, Thin Set. But when they make the foundation, like if you guys have real wax foundation and you hold it up to the light, I mean, it's thick. Thin Set is they take that and squeeze it so much, it's almost translucent. And it's made for cut comb. It is made of real wax.
Okay.
Go ahead.
No, that I was just curious.
It's made of real
so when
wax.
you cut it, can you reuse it?
No.
No.
Because what that Thin Set is, John, is that's the middle section that they're going to draw out on both sides.
Ah.
Okay, so here's my frame of Thin Set.
I'm with
That's
you.
the middle rib that they're building off of.
Yeah. All right.
You could take that thing. If Thin Set is a little bit more expensive than regular foundation because they only make it out of capping wax because they don't want the chemicals and stuff in it because actually the person's going to eat it.
Yeah.
I got a guy that's somewhat related to me on D side way down the line. I take this stuff to Angola and I take all my scraps and it's probably 18-inch box. It's almost the size of the container. If you go to Applebee's and get the dinner, to-go dinner, the box, the little plastic thing, and it has all my scraps in it. This gentleman, when I first met him, he says, Jamie, I will do anything to get your cut comb. So I took him a bunch of scraps. It was over 1.5 pounds of scraps. He calls me a week later and says, do you have any more? And I said, what'd you do? Sell it? And he goes, no, I ate it. I said, you ate 1.5 pounds of cut comb? And he says, I remember this when I was a kid when we went through the Depression. He ate every bit of it.
Hmm.
The other thing that you can do is creamed honey. So your honey, when you start buying starter mix, you can buy the starter. What you do is you take your honey at the end of the year, you warm it up to about 95 degrees, and you either mix in some starter that you bought. Van Lake has some starter. It's almost like powdered sugar. If you even want to make a better one, you can take a mortar and pestle, which is like the stone bowl, and grind it up to actually makes a fluff. So you can make your own. If you have a wine refrigerator, those keep a consistent 57 degrees or a little bit lower. That is the perfect temperature for crystallization. So what you do, you put it in a container, you mix your starter with it, put it in your wine refrigerator. In about 1.5 weeks, all of a sudden you'll pull it up and it just makes this real thick, creamy butter. The other way to cheat on this is find somebody that already has creamed honey, IA Carlin honey. You take his creamed honey, mix it with your liquid honey, and now you've just made a duplicate of his. So you can turn around and cheat a little bit too. Or if you go to the fairs and find somebody that wins a blue ribbon and creamed honey, bid on it, as long as it doesn't go for outrageous amounts, win it, put it in with your honey, and you can make a blue ribbon winner the next year too. That's why Carlin Honey, he hates selling me his creamed honey because he knows I'm making a batch of his stuff. The second year, the best person for this is Dylan Westrick. This is his little bit of an operation. Then you can turn around and get into mead processing. So you're making honey wine. You can add in apples, fruits, all kinds of different stuff. He's got the middle one is the one I love. It's called Triple Berry. It's got raspberries, cherries, blackberries, something else in it. But it is the best tasting mead. And then he refines it down. He's also going to teach some classes next year. He was going to do it this year, but because of COVID. So this is his operation in his basement. He's got racks. He's got all stainless. I mean, he's got a great operation. So that's another thing. And some of it, I don't know, 2 years ago, he said that if you brought him at least 2 to 3 quarts of honey, that he would make you up a small batch of mead and then turn on do it that way. So he'd be the person to get a hold of. You can start collecting pollen in a second year colony. So you can collect pollen early in the spring. There's all kinds. This is the upper right-hand corner, or upper left, excuse me, is the Sundance. This where the bees come in. They walk across the screen. This scrapes off some pollen with pollen catching. That's one. This is Man Lake, where it sits on the front entrance. When they crawl through, they got to crawl through these little holes, and it scrapes the pollen off. Excuse me. Better Bee has one. If you're going to collect pollen, remember the pollen is what the bees need to build up. If you're going to turn on and steal their pollen, you need to turn on and do it like 2 days for you, 2 days for them, 3 days for them, 2 days for you, or some kind of cycle, because if you leave it on, you have to collect the pollen every day because it collects moisture. So this little tiny pollen bead or BB of pollen, if it sits overnight and it's moist out, they just explode. They'll just pop, and the next thing you know, you pull the tray out and it's all moldy and nasty. So every night, so this would be an apiary that's close to you, something you can get to every night. Pull the pollen tray out, put it in a 5-gallon bucket or a little tiny bucket, stick it in the freezer, flash freeze it, bust it up a little bit, shake it around a little bit. Extra ice crystals, they'll turn on, you can get them off, and then turn on, have frozen pollen, and it goes for about $18 $18 for, I think, 8 ounces. So this is another way. But remember, you're starving the colony out at that point also. So you got to kind of be lenient on what you're doing with it. The nice thing about raw pollen, everybody wants it, and you can't get enough of it. The only 2 times you can trap it is early spring, and if you look at the pollen tray on here, you'll see all these colors. In the spring, you're going to see dead nettle, which is purple. You're going to see pollen, which is golden. You'll see browns, blues. You'll see tons and tons of colors, tons of variety. And then when we start getting that summer, then you're going to stop because you need to let your bees build up and get ready for winter. And then in wintertime, there is a market around this area for goldenrod and asters and things like that. And those are going to be just the golden yellows and the browns. So people doing for allergies and health conditions, they'll want to ask you, is it a spring pollen or fall pollen? Or some people just mix it all together and put it in like a 5-gallon bucket, stick it in a deep freeze. And then they just scoop out, you want 8 ounces or you want a pound, they just scoop it out, give it to you, and you just sell it as a mix. So anytime you do this, from the time you collect it, you instantly put it in the freezer. If you leave it out or you try to do the freeze drying and things like that, the health benefits and the enzymes in it are broke down, so you're not getting a good supplement out of it. But
where does this go? Does this go below the bottom board or instead of the bottom board?
Nope. Instead of the bottom board, you're actually putting the trap.
All right.
So here's your colony up top. This is called the Sundance. The other 2, which were back here, John, these just slide on the front of the colony.
Oh, okay.
So you still have but check with the manufacturers and tell them what bottom boards you have, because bottom boards vary back and forth by about a ½ inch.
Okay.
So some of it, I mean, if you call Band Lake and they say, okay, the unit is 18 inches wide, you know you can put it on your board. Ask them what the dimensions are first. So it's just a way to do it. Sundance, it replaces the bottom, either screened or solid bottom board, and then the bees crawl in and they crawl out. The nice thing about the Sundance, it has a screw on the front. You slide it up and it closes, so you're starting to trap the pollen. Then you can unscrew it and slide it down and let the bees go straight into the colony.
Okay.
If you close it, they got to crawl through 3 screens coming back out. And it takes them 3-4 hours to understand, okay, we know we go in this slot, but how do we get back? All of a sudden they'll learn it. By the time you switch it back, then when it's open, they go in and right into the colony. So each time you switch it, so that's why I always say like 3 days for them, 3 days for me, 3 days for them, 3 days for me. And I have about 6 traps. I don't do as much as I used to just because I don't have time. But it's an energy. Baseball players, cross-country runners, people get into this big time. Additive drinks, you can do energy snacks with it. Put it in uncooked food. If the pollen gets over 90 some odd degrees up into the hundreds, it loses all its health benefits. And then it's just a fluff. People put it in skin scrubs. That's what I think Adkins does it. I know Andrew's wife does it. If you trap it, you can raise queens because you're putting in tons and tons of pollen, like getting a pollen frame. If you have a frame of drone comb and you have your pollen, you can just pour it in the frame, rub it in, build all the cells up, put it in between your grafts, and they'll maximize and put in tons and tons of royal jelly. But always store it in the freezer. Always, always, always. Some other things you can do. This is Jeannie for making bee bread. You can actually take the honey. There's all kinds of recipes. If you want one, I can get it from you, or I can turn you over to beeapothecary.org, and she's got tons of stuff on that. Or you can go to FAO.org. So you can turn on and put in your honey. You put in so much pollen, so 1 to 1, 1 to 2, 1 to 4. And when you mix this, every time you take this every week, you're supposed to flip it upside down. All of a sudden, all these pollen grains start to fill up with honey. The moisture builds up, they explode, and it makes, I call it goo. It reminds me of the Nickelodeon slime. Runners love it. My nephew, he's a AA, he's a professional umpire for like the big traveling baseball teams that go around. And they call it goo. If you remember the straws back in the day, not like a restaurant straw, but the big straws that had the sugar in it, you cut the end, you pour it back in your mouth, and you get a sugar high. They put this goo in it, and these little tiny 6-inch or 4-inch strips, heat seal the ends, and they go for $3 a little stick because it's an energy drink. Your body instantly absorbs it. It's not a sugar high, but marathon runners, you'll see them run, and they'll take the little straw and goo it. That's that goo or the honey, and it's called the bee bread. You must store it in a dark place for 2 to 6 weeks and turn it over once. She says once a day on this. I've heard other ones up to a week. Just keep flipping it back and forth. If you like it, I have ate it, but I can't get over the consistency of the slime in my mouth. It's like I don't eat cultured yogurts and things like that. I just can't stand the consistency. But it is a great pick-me-up, and it has no crash at the other side. The propolis, if you want to do this is the perfect time in the fall to trap propolis. I think Andrew's got like 14 of these traps out right now, and he's got tons and tons of propolis. You can collect it on the top and edge boards because your second year, you might have seen tons of propolis going on right now in your colonies. You can scrape that off. I'm going to say don't scrape everything off because there is the propolis in a colony is the bees' medications for fighting antiviruses and sterilizing and keeping the colony healthy on the inside. Because propolis is very acidic. It's under like 3 and 4 point on the pH scale. The bees eat it. They also propolize everything closed. For them, it's an overall everything. If you cut an open tree, or let's say a bee tree falls, everything inside that colony is surrounded with shellac. That's bee propolis. So for them, it's sterile. It keeps everything away. The thing to do in the fall time, right about now, you can do it with the metal or plastic. This is an exaggeration with the hive tool, but what you do is you take off the inner cover, you put your propolis board, either metal or plastic, and you put a little chunk of 2x4 in each corner that it lets in extra light and ventilation. And what happens is the bees, the house bees on the inside, when they in the fall, when they start collecting propolis because they're getting the plant oils, they're getting off the pines and different stuff. They mix it up, they make this propolis, and they'll fill all these gaps up because they're trying to seal the colony up for winter. Then you can take this trap, put it in a freezer for 48 hours till it's crispy. If you have the plastic one, you can just take it. Do not do this in your house. Pre-warning right now. Take it out in a garage or somewhere else. As you get a drop cloth, a plastic drop cloth all around you. As you twist that plastic, the propolis snaps off, or the metal, and you scrape it. Then you're scraping it. It's like chipping off paint, and it flies everywhere. Scrape it back up, put it in a container. Then you have raw propolis. If you scratch it or scrape it off the frames or the box, then you're getting wood shavings with it. And that's more of a, if you do it with the traps, that's grade A. And then you can sell it to like Bee Apothecary, other people. I think it goes for like $16 a pound right now, which is way more than honey. If you scrape it off the frames and there's little bits of wood and other debris, that's class B. And I only think you'll get like seven or eight. And I might be wrong on that.
Quick question, Jamie.
Yes, ma'am.
Since my one hive, that's all they love to do is propolize everything, including my hive beetle traps. If I put that propolis collector thing on there, will that keep them from propolizing my traps shut?
It might help.
Okay.
It'll give them something else to do, because here's the problem, and I hear this all the time, so it's just not you. When you're a new beekeeper, all your colonies are nice and square, okay? So you haven't chewed the corners up with your hive tool. Different bees or different breeds of bees will just get into this whole absolute fascination with propolizing everything. Adam McDowell, I talked to him at a club meeting, or if you come out October 17th, he had a colony that barely put on any honey, but when propolis season kicked in, they glued a 3-deep colony almost completely closed, where we had to have 2 hive tools and pull it apart. When you start to get that older gear where you're taking your hive tool and you're digging the corners, trying to pop them apart all the time, that's where that extra gapping is around, and that's where the bees kind of use that propolis. If you have a breed of bee right now that's putting in tons of propolis, put on a trap on the top. Number one, it'll help you. Number two, it gives them something else to do other than gluing everything else shut. And if you get a market for it, like selling it to Carlin, if there's a market for that, or you want to make your own tinctures and stuff that's on this slide, you got a way to do that. So you're offsetting the honey production for propolis production.
How do you feed them with that on there?
How do you feed? You usually take the feed off. You have what, 1-to-1 right on that right now?
I took the 1-to-1 off. I have pollen patties up there right now. But I mean, you can't feed if that trap is on there, correct?
You can feed. You can't feed liquid. What you could do is get it's called a spacer, so that 1.5 to 2 inch, it just goes around the top rim. You could still leave some winter patty, or if you're going to do that, and then just take off the inner cover and put your propolis trap on top of that.
Okay. So no liquids. Okay.
Yep. And you're just going to stop the liquids because you have nowhere to put that right now.
Okay.
And they can't crawl through a propolis trap. Like a queen, and people get this confused. A queen restrictor lets the workers through, but not the queen, because she's got much more of an abdomen, okay? A propolis trap is little tiny slits. It's just enough to let in sunlight. You can't put your finger or anything through it like a queen excluder. And all it is that little slit, it's making the bees put that propolis in there, and then when you snap it, it just comes clean. So some things you can do with propolis, if you have, I'll refer it back to Andrew, or not Andrew, but I'll think of his name here in a minute. He has the little plastic capsules. So he makes capsules of raw propolis because he eats them. You can make it into a tincture. So you can do it with Everclear. If you get Everclear, you can buy it in Indiana, like 190 proof, and you can make a tincture with it. There's tons of health benefits as a cough suppressant. You can put it underneath your tongue. There's tons and tons and tons of reading on this. And I'll show you the next slide with Bee Apothecary. It helps with gum disease. You can use it with toothpaste. Don't use too much of it, because if you've ever seen like real heavy coffee drinkers where their teeth are stained, propolis will do that to you mega style. And if you ever get it stuck on your teeth, it is a bear to take off. So when you use it, just use little amounts. You can use it in nose drop, cough drops. People make suckers out of it. Creams and salves, that's probably Andrew. They use a lot of it. Lip balms, varnishes, wood and leather treatments. I mean, and I'll tell you the next side real quick. Bee propolis. Bee Apothecary is the only woman I know in probably the tri-state area that they buy it. And I apologize, it's $30 a pound, and that was 2 years ago. And I don't know what it's up to yet. But she has, if you go to her site, it actually tells you the ways to do it. Putting it in a freezer bag, that way they can open it up, because once it gets warm, it gets back to that consistency. If it's not in the freezer, it gets back to the consistency of like road tar. It sticks in it, everything. So they show you how to ship it to them, what to do with it. So you can have the whole type of thing on that. But there's a whole entire market. And if you have a strain of bees like that, Jen, and they're good at that, this is something you could probably get into. And her website has like 400 and some odd things you can do with propolis. As a second year beekeeper, you're going to start getting wax. When you use wax, don't use that, and you're not going to see it as a second year beekeeper. But if you start getting that old, nasty brown, black comb, don't mix that down for wax that you're going to use into lip balms and you're going to use to seal up honey containers and do things like that. If you have that old, nasty stuff, the best beekeepers, what we do is we turn on and use the old comb, and you use that for like varnishes, or you can use it in things you want to seal up. You can use it in a bait hive to get in more bees. You can do other things with it. That lighter capping wax or the light wax you're going to use that in the lip balms, your candles and things like that. Because remember, this old wax is hygroscopic, so it's pulling in chemicals, it's pulling in all the bad stuff away from the bees. And the last thing you want to do is have this brown, nasty comb. You melt it into a candle and have somebody heating it in their house. So there's tons of things to do. You can melt it out. The best way, this one says, pour through a cheesecloth. That is, but you have to have multiple layers of cheesecloth. If you pour, yes, sir.
I'm certainly far from any expert, but I did build a solar wax melter that works very well. Yep. And went on YouTube as to how to best strain. And at least I tried 3 different types. I found women's hose. Yep. Actually, it was for, I don't know the difference, but it was for like a bigger women hose. And that really, really did the job. I mean, it was like extremely good wax. And I talked to some other beekeepers, and they said you ought to keep that. I was just going to like give it away, and they said, no, keep it, because you can
keep it,
melt it down and put it on your foundation. So at any rate, my point is that if anybody wants to try that, other than a cheesecloth, which is definitely got wider holes, the women's hose really worked really well.
Yeah, and that's one that Dee usually uses. The other thing you can do is go to the Dollar Tree or these off-brand where they donate. I can't think Goodwill. Find the old white t-shirts, go down and buy them for $1 a piece, cut them up into chunks. The hot wax will pour right through that t-shirt. Don't get colored because that'll turn on and taint the color of the wax. But white t-shirts, D usually goes out and buys make $5 worth of old t-shirts. We cut them up into 1 foot by 1 foot squares and then turn on and use that. It'll pour right through in t-shirt and with fishnets, or not fishnets, excuse me, nylons. You can pour that through that wax and enter a competition, and it'll turn on and strain out all the impurities, and you can easily win competitions. Please remember, if you do anything with wax, it does have a flash point of 400 degrees. If you're using open flame on a stove or outside, and all of a sudden it starts to boil over a little bit or get hot enough that flash point, it's like a grenade going off. And the wax will explode. Hot wax coming at you at 10, 20, 30 miles an hour and hitting your raw skin or in your face, please be careful. So use a slow cooker, something that you can control the heat, something where you have a hot plate where you can control things, and just make sure it's underneath that. Some of the things you can do with all this wax, and you don't have to have a boatload of it. They have different kits through, all the different dealers. You can do lip balm on a small scale, skincare products, the promenades, beer wax, shaving soap. You can turn on and make the candles. There's all kinds of molds that you can see in all those different catalogs. And then on top of that, there's even more stuff that you can do. So for Jen, cracked animal hooves, there you go. You can mold it and make earplugs. Rubbing braces for kids. In fact, I even hate to say it. It was all capping wax one year, and I made these. Mann Lake has these molds. When you buy the molds, buy the silicone molds that you can bend. If you buy the hard plastic molds, you'll use it about 6 times and it'll break the plastic. So when you use it, use the silicone molds. It's more, you're like $28 for the mold. You can make these little 1 ounce bars. It says 1 ounce on it when you pull it out. I had a father got 2 of his kids in braces, knew about this whole thing that I'd never heard of. And he says, do you sell little bars of wax? And I said, yeah. His kids take it because and I've never had braces, so I can't testify for this. I guess when you first get braces, they hurt so bad because it's pulling your teeth around. And when they use the wax, when they get food or their lips stuck in the braces, I guess it cuts their lips. So they use the wax, the beeswax, to rub over the gums and kind of get that wax built into there so the kids don't cut their lips and everything up. And he ended up buying like $30 of these bars. Temporary tooth filling. So if you have a filling fall out, you can push it in. There's 10 times this amount. If you're a woodworker, I've sold tons of them 1 ounce bars to woodworkers, which I learned myself. If you have oak, fine woodworking stuff, they pre-drill the hole, they take the nail or the screw, they wipe it through beeswax, and they can screw it in and it doesn't split the wood. I learned that about 5 years ago. If you use beeswax though, please don't use, if you have your stuff, it is your stuff for the bee yard. Don't go in like I did and I used Dee's measuring cup, then tried to clean it. Wax doesn't come off anything. Use the silicone utensils. They're easier to clean. Your measuring cup, that's going to be the bee yard measuring cup. The paper towels, you can use alcohol, BeeGo, heat guns, a roaster, but that's your equipment. That's the stuff that you're going to use for doing this process because you're going to have old comb on it. You're always going to have, and do it in a place that you don't mind if you spill it, if you turn on, pour it out, if you scrape it and little chunks go off. Don't do it in your kitchen with Berber carpet. Been there, done it. You'll melt holes in your carpet, which I have I'll take a picture of it sometime to show you how bad I was. I melted wax in the house. It started to spill and I knocked it and it hit the carpet and melted the Berber carpet right down to the base. Just do it in a place that you know that if something goes wrong, you're not going to kill things or have your wife or husband want to beat you. Any questions on that?
And don't clean the wax or any particles of it in your sink.
Oh, no.
not a wise move.
No. Been there, done that too. That's why in my garage or my honey house, I bought the counter from up in Bryan, Ohio. It's the second place. They have the counter place or countertop place. I can't think of the name of it. It's in Bryan, Ohio.
Yeah.
And they make these countertops that are like 20 some odd feet long. And it has to go through a heater. So they put that Formica top in the whole 9 yards. They have a second house. It's called a secondary sale place that maybe the end got chipped or maybe it warped a little bit. You can pick up these gigantic chunks of countertop and marble, wood, all kinds of butcher top. It looks like you can buy it for like $5 for these gigantic sections. And then I just found a stainless steel sink, took a Sawzall, cut it in, dropped it in, and that's my sink out there. Yeah, you do it in the house, you'll have wax, honey, and it's a mess. So any questions on that? So your homework for next month, give me your game plan. How many colonies you think you're going to take through wintertime? How many colonies you think you're going to come out? And what's your game plan for next year? There's no right or wrong, like I said. Is it going to be honey production? Are you going to try to maximize that? Are you going to get into some queen rearing stuff? We went over cut comb. If you guys go through winter over with great things of cut comb or great colony strength and healthy colonies, cut comb might be a great thing to run and try for. So give me some game plans. As soon as I get off this call, we're about 1 o'clock. I'm probably not going to get to it this afternoon because I need to visit Jen. I got to do some running. Then I got to go see Adam about a colony that built underneath his colony on a screen bottom board, and it's drawing down. So I got to take care of that little mess with him. Late tonight, do not be surprised if you receive at least 3 emails from me. The handouts from 2 talks ago, last talk, and then this talk. They'll be in PowerPoint form or PDF format, so you can print them off and get them inside your books. And then I'm also going to send you the test A, B, and then C that we did together. So you guys can put that in there and put some notes with it of all those different situations that we talked about. And then remember, with any situation that you're looking at, either you or another beekeeper,